across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So here I am, standing in for Ian Collins on, as you've just heard, the Afternoon Empire. And I've got to tell you, from this side of the desk, without Julia Hartley-Brewer in the studio, who I usually sit in with and Ian takes over from, it feels very different. And it's interesting as you get in, you have to have a little talk with compliance. There's this fantastic list just outside the door of words that I'm not allowed to say. I have a photocopy of it in front of me. Let's see how long I last before compliance come in. Oh, no, I think the team on the other side of the glass have just had a little bit of a heart attack. Well, like it or not, folks, you have me for the next 3 hours, Philip Ingram. But I don't want to be alone. This channel, Talk, the home of common sense, we want to get your common sense that we can bring it out. I want your insights. I want to hear your alternative thoughts. Agree with me or disagree with me, get in touch. You know, we get away from the soundbite headlines we hear on the mainstream media, the BBC, Sky and others. These soundbites are exploited by our politicians to avoid answering questions. You know, we had the Security Minister this morning avoiding answering questions about asylum. And we've got soundbite-driven politics. Well, we're here in the studio to put a little bit of meat on the bones of what's really going on and to bring you an understanding, but more importantly, to give you a voice. So you've made the decision to tune in and listen to me. This is your channel. Use the opportunity. If only, please, just to give my voice a rest and let me have a slurp of my tea. So the government's in trouble again. It took the Tories 14 years of steady progress downwards to get their current unfavourable rating of -65. And that's according to YouGov. Labour have got to -64. They're nearly there, but in record time. And seem to be falling further. We will be okay today as we look at the asylum seeker issues. What else am I looking at? Economy, borrowings at the highest level, inflation steadily climbing, rumours of raids on property tax to a growing black hole. I thought there was 22 billion inherited. It seems to have gone up to 40 or 50, and we don't know where this is coming from. And then back to 40 again. Where is it? And of course, the gangs that lead to the asylum seekers and getting them illegally into this country haven't been smashed. But it sounds as if the Chancellor is just getting ready to smash her pockets and looks as if she's going to smash them even more. So today's question, if not hotels, where do we house illegal migrants? So if not hotels, where do we house illegal migrants? Please call in on 0344 499 1000 or text on 87222. Or give us a message on @talkTV. Or again, WhatsApp us on 0344 499 1000. We want to get your voice. And of course, all of these things cost your standard network rate. So in the first hour, we're going to look at the fight against the asylum housing scheme being led by Epping Council, beating government policy in the courts and setting a precedence that many Tory and Reform-led councils seem to be planning to emulate. Why they hadn't thought of it beforehand, I don't know. However, I've got more fundamental questions to ask. Why are we putting these illegal invaders of our country? And they are coming in illegally. They're breaking the law by not going through any recognised routes. Whether those routes exist or not is a different matter. Mostly fighting-age men. That is the vast proportion that are coming in. They're being put into hotels. And the alternative, whenever people talk about them being pushed out of the hotels, as Epping Council seems to have got the courts to agree to, is a house of multiple occupancy. Why? We need to understand the alternative. What is the legal driver for such palatial accommodation? If you're a lawyer or a barrister or a legal expert out there, please tell me, because I can't work it out and I can't find it. If these individuals were refugees in their own countries, or had moved to neighbouring countries to get away from war, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees would have the tented camps for them. They'd be in there. They'd be secure. They'd be away from harm, but they'd be in tented camps. We tried the Bibi Stockholm, a barge moored, but that was considered unacceptable. But it's acceptable for the crew of HMS Queen Elizabeth, who are currently in Glasgow as HMS Queen Elizabeth, our aircraft carrier and flagship of the fleet is being refurbished. They're going into the Sans Vitesse, a Bibi Stockholm equivalent. How is that sort of accommodation acceptable for our service personnel who put their lives on the line to keep us safe? But it's not acceptable for fighting age men that are coming across the channel illegally, being pushed across by these gangs that are supposedly being smashed. And we also look at what is going on in the local communities, and the crime statistics themselves speak for themselves. Increased number of assaults, increased number of thefts, sex attacks. There's more going on in the communities, and it seems to be being forced in the communities. Why can't we keep these individuals in secure camps until their asylum status has been confirmed? We have veterans sleeping in the doorways of some of these hotels holding the asylum seekers. The asylum seekers are living the life of luxury compared to these rough sleepers that have tried to protect our livelihood and have fallen on difficult times. They're getting funded driving lessons, they're getting funded golf lessons, they're getting days out. Those that have contributed to everything to our country seem to get nothing. Those that have contributed nothing seem to get everything. How is that fair? Come on, tell me if you think it's fair. Why can't we have asylum applicant camps, safe, more comfortable than they have in Calais, where a lot of them have come from, where the illegal arrivals can be held until they're processed and ideally sent home? Give us your thoughts. Come on, 0344 499 1000 for calls and WhatsApp, and text on 87222. Let me know. So this first hour, we've got joining me for the first half hour of this hour, Chloe Dobbs, who is a political commentator. Chloe, nice to have you on.
Yes, nice to meet you, albeit virtually, Philip. You've done a smashing job already.
Thank you.
First 10 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm surprised that we haven't been on together before, but that time will come. So, on the first bit, Epping scored a victory in the High Court as the High Court ruled asylum seekers must leave the Bell Hotel by the 12th of September after protests and peaceful protests generally and a migrant's arrest. Let's listen to what Dan Jarvis, the Security Minister, had to say about this morning.
Could you at least answer just so specifically, if it's not hotels, as Security Minister, what is it?
So for reasons that I completely understand, you're focusing on one particular bit of this problem, and I'm evidencing the activity right across the sort of the spectrum of the challenge in terms of the leveraging diplomatic relations with our partners internationally and stopping the flow of people getting to the northern beaches of France in the first place, which is my primary area of concern.
Come on, Chloe, surely that was typical ministerial waffle and he didn't tell us anything in particular.
Well, you will have seen there, I mean, the people listening won't have seen it, but he was looking down whilst he was answering the question there rather than looking the interviewer in the eye, which showed that he was pretty nervous to answer that. The Labour Party don't seem to have any good answers as to what to do about this problem, and I bet they had a pretty sleepless night at the Home Office last night after that High Court injunction about the Bell Hotel in Epping, because this sets a huge precedent, not just for Epping, but for the whole country. This court ruling has basically shown that housing asylum seekers in hotels is not in line with planning rules, because a hotel is legally supposed to be somewhere that has people stay on a temporary basis, not a permanent basis, and it is required for a hotel that anybody and everybody is allowed to book in to stay there, which is of course not the case when it is shut off to the public just so that only asylum seekers can stay there. So we've already had I think it's Broxbourne Council come out and put out a statement last night to say we're going to try and do the same, and I think there's going to be a huge domino effect, and they are going to be freaking out about what to do in the Home Office. They can try desperately to get contracts with landlords and whatnot to put people up in private rented accommodation, HMOs. But if there's a really fast domino effect with this, they're going to really struggle to keep up, and then maybe they will have to resort to putting them in tents in a field or something like that. And I'll be honest, I don't have a problem with that. I have been to these camps in Calais, and a lot of people think, oh, they just turn up there and they stay in a tent for a day and then they come across to Britain. No. A lot of these people staying in Calais, they will stay in those camps in Calais for often a year.
Yeah, they're living rough at the edges of Calais and all the rest of it. You know, we've asked the question out to the audience. You know, if not for hotels, where do we house them? What are your views? If you were the Home Office Minister who had to make a decision, what decision would you make?
I would go for tents and fields, and I think that is the only thing that's going to be stomachable to the British public. If they try and boast that they've closed all the hotels and they've met their election pledge to close the hotels, but they're actually all in our communities, in private rented accommodation, families have been turfed out their houses because the landlords have been offered above the market rate and 5 years guaranteed rent. People aren't going to stomach that. That's still going to be a society where these people are treated better than Brits who have to set their alarm every single morning to earn money all day to try and pay the bills, while someone who's turned up and doesn't work and gets days out to bouncy castles, the cinema and everything else gets it for free. It's not going to be stomachable. I mean, ultimately, we need to stop them coming across in the first place. And my hope with this, I know that closing down the hotels isn't going to solve all of the problems, but I hope it causes enough chaos for the Home Office in terms of the housing situation that maybe that gives them the kick up the backside that they need to actually stop the boats coming across. Because I am not convinced so far with their so-called smashing the gangs strategy that they're actually having a proper go at it.
Well, you know, to be fair, you know, it was the last Tory government that started the hotels, putting asylum seekers in hotels. What do you think the driver was for that? Why didn't they go for camps in the first place? And you know, do you think the Labour government, by opposing or trying to help people oppose Baby Stockholm before they got into government, and then when they got into government, oppose the Rwanda deterrent bill, do you think they have shot themselves in the foot?
So a couple of questions there. Why did the Tories put them into hotels rather than tents? So, I mean, first of all, human rights lawyers, I mean, you've spoken about the Bibi Stockholm barge. I've researched the Bibi Stockholm barge and the company that owns it. They have a whole fleet of these barges, and their business model is that they rent these out to, for example, oil rig workers for them to live on. Why is it fine for oil rig workers, but you have all these lawyers and the Just Stop Oil protesters that sat in the road in front of the coach taking people to Bibi Stockholm saying, stop the floating prison. It's insane. You had human rights lawyers saying you can't house people here because so-and-so migrant has a fear of water. I guess maybe they think they've got PTSD after they came across on a boat. But yet the lawyers are a big problem. And I think this was a problem where they were dealing with it in a hurry, and maybe they thought even if it's more expensive, it's easier for us to just rent out a hotel than it is for us to set up a campsite. I mean, you saw what happened with the RAF sites, and they had all these troubles with the Wi-Fi, the water supply, and all of this. So I think they probably thought, even though it's more expensive, that it was easier, but it's caused huge problems in communities, and people are just sick of it because it seems like they're everywhere now. And then Labour, you're right that they will have shot themselves in the foot if they now come out and say after this chaos, oh, we're going to have to put them in a field in tents, or we're going to have to put them on something like the Bibi Stockholm barge. One of those barges certainly isn't going to cut it, I'll tell you that, so I doubt that will happen. But they are going to look like hypocrites once again. I mean, they've shown themselves to be hypocrites on pretty much everything since they came into power, so I'm not sure much difference that will make if they do a U-turn.
We've got a human rights lawyer as Prime Minister. Do you think he was wrong to just bin from a political perspective the Rwanda deal?
Absolutely.
And do you think putting asylum seekers in tents and fields would act as the deterrent, or do you think that we've got this problem that's just going to keep coming and coming and coming?
I will give you a slightly nuanced response to that. So, Rwanda, I was very skeptical of the Rwanda plan because the idea we got, it was going to cost a huge amount of money per person that we were going to send, and it was only going to be a small number of people. But I went to Calais just before the general election last year, and a load of migrants that I spoke to all said, we are waiting until after the general election to cross because we're genuinely worried about Rwanda. Because actually, these people in Calais, they're not that educated, and they didn't know exactly how many people are going to be sent to Rwanda, and they genuinely worried about it. So it was starting to work, and I think it was really stupid for them to bin that, especially how much time and work and all the process in the courts to just try and get it off the line. Why not just give it a shot? Why not just get a few planes?
You and I agree completely on that. Chloe, we're going to take a short break here because I've got lots more I want to talk to you about, and we'll get away from asylum seekers. So back to you in a minute.
If there was a so-called peace agreement, and he kept territory, which I think is an abomination when you think that he invaded.
Agreed.
If he did that, he'll come back for more. I mean, Hitler did that. He does that. All the dictators of history never give up because they believe they're right, and they will do whatever it takes. They don't care about human life. He's got 1 million people that have been killed or injured as a result of his invasion on the Russian side alone, and something like 300,000 to 400,000 killed or wounded on the Ukrainian side because he decided to go to war with them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk. I'm Philip Ingram. Now, I'm being joined by Chloe Dobbs, and we're in this half hour talking through a number of different subjects. Chloe, good to have you back again. The second thing I want to look at with you this morning, or sorry, this afternoon, there's me not getting my timings right. The faith in police numbers in the police has crumbled. And less than half the population think that officers are doing a good job. This is on the back of the crime survey for England and Wales that has just been published, saying only 49% rated local police as good or excellent. Police visibility has dropped, with only 11% seeing foot patrols on a weekly basis, never mind daily, down 29% from a decade ago. Victim satisfaction with police responses fell to 51% in 2025, compared to 70% in 2015 and 75% in 2014. Do you think that we have a problem with our police, or do you think the police are just completely overstretched and they need to be either reformed, given additional resources, or both?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think that these figures are quite shocking. There's really been quite a loss of faith in the British police, and I think that British policing does work on this kind of mutual respect between them and the public. The British police are very different to cops in America. Cops in America, they're often much harsher. They're very quick to taser you and get in a shouty argument with you, whereas British police have always worked on that mutual respect where they can go chat to a member of the public. They're very good at de-escalation, talking people out of doing something silly. They rarely get the tasers and the batons out. They normally step in and calm things down very well. And I think that that's something I've in the past been very proud of, that we've got such a great police force in this country, but that respect is very quickly eroding, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. You now see more often people going up to police, especially with their smartphones and their cameras these days, sort of having a go at them, accusing them of two-tier policing and not doing their jobs properly. And I think that is a great shame. How did we get to that? I think that is partly they are overstretched, and people are getting frustrated that, as you say, people rarely see police around their area. You call them, they never turn up unless it's something really, really serious. They kind of just say, oh, jog on, here's a crime reference number, sorry, sort yourself out, call your insurance if you've been burgled, we don't want anything to do with it. So that's really frustrated people, because I think most people have experienced that at some point when they've called them and nobody has come to help them, and you think, I'm paying my taxes for this. And then the other thing is that people are definitely starting to see this two-tier policing. I absolutely do think that it exists, where there's, first of all, they see police focusing more on policing things that really don't matter, like people's speech, than things that are serious. People see muggings all the time and shoplifting all the time, and that's really annoying people.
So in the two-tier policing, I want to go back to that, because it's interesting. Do you think the introduction of the police and crime commissioners politicising that higher control of the police has meant that there has been an erosion in their operational flexibility and freedom to do what they want? And do you think, from a commentator's perspective, we actually give the police too much of a hard time when there's too many other pressures being put on them, whether it be paperwork, whether it be political pressures, whether it be other things that are detracting them from carrying out basic police work?
I'm not 100% sure as to, on this question of should we have police and crime commissioners. If we're going to have them, we need to make sure that we have good ones that aren't political, and I think there should be some kind of mechanism to hold police to account if they become too political and clearly make inappropriate decisions. What you see in the police is when they do something stupid and they do something inappropriate and they wrongly arrest people, that nobody ever is held accountable. I mean, the extreme example of that is the grooming gangs, and you've got places like the South Yorkshire Police where no one's ever really been fired or held to account for the horrific mishandling of the problem that went on. That's that. But I do think that there is also an issue with them being given too much of a hard time if they make a small mistake. Realistically, there will be some mistakes made by the police, but you don't want them to be terrified, because I think one of the big problems you have got is, for example, one of the reasons why police and security at shops will not get involved with shoplifters and try and hold them down, get them on the ground and whatnot, is because they're worried, if it's a person of colour, I might be accused of some sort of racist
Yeah, you talk of racism, and it's interesting. The other thing that's occupying the police at the moment is flags. And the St George's Cross, I'm Birmingham based, and there's lots of flags appearing around where I live, and the police apparently are investigating that a St George's Cross was painted on a mini roundabout in Bromsgrove, which is up my part of the woods, and has been deemed as criminal damage. At least 5 other roundabouts in the West Midlands have reportedly been painted in similar patriotic ways. Worcester Council have been removing the paint, citing unauthorised markings, distracting and unsafe for road users, and the flags have been taken down. And I saw one council say that the erection of the flags could cause the lampposts that they're being put on to collapse, and come up with all these silly things. Do you think this is just putting another set of pressure on the police, and do you think people are getting a bit silly about flags and national markings, and we should be celebrating them?
I think that the police are being silly about it. Now, look, I get it. If you go out and you get some red paint out and you paint something that you don't own, yes, you've technically vandalized something. I guess that's the word that they are going to use, and it's technically not allowed. But when people see that this is the police's top priority, they're straight out there, and the council is straight out there to remove this red paint off the roundabouts, yet somehow they can't find the time to fight knife crime or shoplifting. That is clearly two-tier policing, and it just shows the police to be silly and not have their priorities straight. And then the stuff with the lamppost, I mean, my understanding is that is the council as opposed to the police going around taking down these flags. Health and safety concerns. I'm sorry, a lamppost is not going to fall over because of a piece of fabric.
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen the risk assessments that they've done.
And if one of those flags fell, you know, the ties came undone and fell off a lamppost and hit my head, I probably wouldn't even feel it. It is a piece of cloth. It's absolutely bonkers. And then going back to the roundabouts, they're saying, oh, this is a priority because, you know, it's against the highway code if there's a cross on the roundabout and that's going to distract road users. I am sorry, but you shouldn't have a driving license if you are going to be confused as to how to use a mini roundabout. Well, I've got a cross on it. I mean, a non-mini roundabout, they put statues on them, sculptures.
Yeah, but again,
we all managed to figure out how to drive around it.
You clearly haven't driven around Bromsgrove and around Birmingham. A lot of people don't know how to use mini roundabouts, and that's really scary. So I don't think painting a red cross on them is going to change that in any way, shape or form. But one of the concerns is you online, and I think the police might be getting involved because people are tweeting about this. Maybe that's it. That's why it's become a priority. Operation Raise the Colours, which is an online patriotism campaign, is encouraging people to display flags across England. But some people are trying to associate that with extreme right-wing politics and trying to politicise a lot of what's going on. How much do you think there is a political backing to this of some description, and how much do you think is just local people getting fed up and trying to follow a campaign that's making them feel good?
So, first of all, I would say to be patriotic is not far right in any way. I mean, we have reached an absolutely bonkers state of affairs if you are considered an extremist, if you simply like your country's flag and are proud of your country. It's very unique to Britain that we've somehow ended up in this state of being self-loathing. If you go on holiday to any other country, go to Europe, go to France, go to Spain, go to Italy, you'll see people hanging their country's flags off their balconies and whatnot. It's everywhere, but for some reason in Britain it's looked down upon, and people say, oh, because our country made some mistakes in the past a long time ago, therefore you're some evil colonialist if you dare fly the flag. Every country's got some messed up history. It doesn't mean the whole country should be put in a dustbin. Talking messed up history,
before it becomes history, I just want to touch one subject finally, as we're coming close to the end of our time, and it's close to my heart and from my background. Trump has ruled out US troops going to Ukraine, backing European forces with US air support. World leaders, including Starmer, formed a coalition to resist Putin's demands for full Donbass control. Let's have a quick listen to US President's comment from the summit with President Zelensky.
I don't think you need a ceasefire. If you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals, we made peace and long-term, long-running wars. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting.
So, Chloe, we have to go to geopolitics because that's an area that I love. Do you think that we're any closer to peace after all of this?
I think a little bit. I think there's clearly been a good rapport built between Trump and Putin, and then Trump and Zelensky. I mean, that meeting, even if you didn't end up with some perfect peace deal coming out of it, I think it's fair to say that they got on a lot more amicably than the first time they met in the Oval Office, which was quite the show, wasn't
yes.
it? Where it resulted in this shout match. And clearly you had the other European leaders that went there. They helped coach Zelensky as to how to deal with Trump. The Ukrainians, they can be very straightforward and blunt, and how they put their view across sometimes, and they taught him how to I suppose you could say butter him up a little better. He gave a letter for Melania to Trump. Maybe that was a bit inspired by Starmer's attempts to win over Trump by giving that letter for a sleepover with the king. So we'll see what happens. I think we're closer, but I think it is going to be really difficult to bring this to an end, because both Putin and Zelensky have really hard lines. Zelensky doesn't want to give up anything, but Putin, both of them are very, from a selfish perspective, concerned about their own reputations. Both of them know that they're going to go down as leaders if they can't be seen to have made this a win. I know that they've got censorship and propaganda and what in Russia, so they can try and twist the headlines to make it look like it's a win for Putin. But he has to come out with some.
Well, yeah, Putin would want to come out with something.
We didn't just spend several years fighting and having all your sons die for nothing.
Exactly, but only one leader got his country to invade another sovereign territory. So it'll be interesting. But neither of them on the same sheet of paper. So the conditions aren't set for us getting any closer. Chloe Dobbs, it's been a real pleasure meeting you. And in the studio next time, please, if we can.
Yes, hopefully. We'll see you again.
Thank you. And we're going to take another quick break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart talk.
And welcome back. Now, our slot for calls, I understand, is at about 10:02 if we get there, if I can keep up with time. So please keep the calls coming in at 0344 499 1000. Text 87222. Nobody's left a voice note yet. I want to do a voice note. So come on, someone. Please leave a voice note for me to play if the team turns around and says it's able to be played. Some of the ones I understand that have come through beforehand haven't been able to be played, but then you haven't got a list of the words and things that are banned out there. Staying with the Epping Hotel debacle. Is it a debacle? The debate, because we'll have a debate on it. We're very fortunate to have Jeremy McIver at the moment, who's Reform UK's first Essex councillor, to give us his understanding of what's been going on. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yeah, so go on. What are your thoughts? You've seen all of this coming out. Is this the government's policy for asylum seekers or illegal migrants falling apart completely? And are we about to see, if not a domino effect, a tsunami effect through other councils?
Well, first of all, I've had a permanent smile on my face, as you can imagine, all day. Not for myself, but for the people of Epping that they have peacefully protested, those mums, those nans, and despite every name under the sun being thrown at them, despite even their local councillors refusing to join them there, every week in, week out. It's been a consistent and passionate campaign, and I'm just delighted for the people that have been organising those protests. And, you know, what happens next? Well, I mean, frankly, I think this is the beginning of the end of hotels being used. I think this is the start of our borders potentially being controlled. If the government was serious, I think it could be. But actually what this is the start of people up and down the country saying enough is enough. And they have every right to feel like that. And I sincerely hope that people will peacefully protest, as the people of Epping have done. A blueprint has now been formed for how we can get successful injunctions. Let's not forget here, the government has broken the law. That's what this is ultimately about. There has been some laws broken. They seem to pick and choose what laws they're going to follow.
And do you think other councils will have fallen foul of this as well? Or, you know, because from a legal perspective, it is a very specific area of the law, and it's to do with planning legislation and to do with change of use and that not properly being followed through. Was that unique just to this area, or do you think it's across the country?
Well, I'm sure there's probably cases of this across the country. Now, I'm not a legal expert, but what I can say is that it's not just because of the legal technicality. It would be quite insulting to the people of Epping to assume that's the only reason why this injunction has taken place. This injunction has happened because the people of Epping have forced the council to take action that could have been taken, you know, for the last 4 years. This hotel has been used on and off. You know, it's been quite hilarious to watch the Conservatives, you know, go around, you know, parading this sort of victory. They could have done an injunction. From what we've seen, they could have done this a long time ago. So actually, there are probably many hotels in the same position, but it's the contents of the injunction made very clear. There's been obviously some issues in the community as a result of the peaceful protesting. I don't actually recognise that, by the way. I actually think the community's been very united on this whole thing. But certainly the local councillors haven't liked being humiliated by their residents week in, week out when they don't show up to peacefully protest with them. But what I think we're seeing now is across the country, there will be many other examples of this. And it's absolutely right that people use the rights that they have to peacefully protest to force their council to do something. Bear in mind, there will be some, we're fortunate in Epping that, you know, the council were prepared to take those steps when they were forced to do so. There will be some councils in this country that ideologically won't want to do this.
But so Jamie, but at the end of the day, you know, these asylum seekers are here. Whether they should be here or not is you know a different debate. Something has to be done with them. We're asking people out there, where would we house them? Where would you house them?
We shouldn't be housing them here. They need to be deported. These people have entered the country illegally.
But until we deport them, because you know,
a government with a massive majority in Parliament, they can do whatever they want. If they want to deport them, they can. They don't want to because they don't ideologically want to. Let's be very clear about that. The government of the United Kingdom ultimately does what Parliament wants. Parliament is ultimate sovereignty. Parliament makes the laws. The government can leave conventions. The government can deport people if they want to.
And do you think Rwanda was the answer? Do you think Rwanda would have worked?
Well, Rwanda's now been removed, but I think, frankly, people need to know if they come here, they get detained and then they get deported if they come here illegally. You know, this argument that there's, you know, we have to just, you know, isn't it sad, isn't it? I had a journalist say to me yesterday, well, you can only deal with the system you've got. What an awful way to live. What's the point in having politicians? What's the point in a taxpayer paying politicians and paying for a parliament to legislate if they're not prepared to legislate to make the borders of this country secure?
So, it's great saying the government should do this. They've got the political strength to do it and all the rest of it. Do you think they will? Do you think the government is stuck in a position where they just don't know what to do now because of their ideological beliefs?
Labour know what to do. They don't want to do it. Labour do not recognise the national security emergency this country has. Unvetted men daily entering this country, coming to a hotel near your children soon. That is the reality. It is unsustainable to put them in hotels. It's unsustainable to allow them to come here. That's why they need to be deported. And as
a local councillor, you know, how much of your time in council and your thinking time is this issue taking up whenever and therefore distracting you from doing the other things that local councils are there to do, to make sure the roads are working, you know, the potholes are filled in, the bins are emptied, you've got proper care for elderly in the community, and everything else?
Yeah, so I'm a district and county councillor, so I'm fortunate I'm across all the briefs. This is not a distraction. It's my absolute pleasure to support my residents with any campaign. On this occasion, we've been campaigning to close the hotel. Just 2 weeks ago, I was campaigning to save a pub in Ongar, where I represent, where they wanted to develop the whole car park. The council's policy was enabling that. We've managed to save the pub. The Reform UK councillors did a great job of doing that and campaigning with residents. I've been campaigning behind the scenes to stop the cancellation of the elections in Essex. And I think, frankly, if the elections had taken place, you'd have had a reform-run Essex County Council, and all these legal options would have been considered far greater speed than the current administration.
Jamie, brilliant. And you've done a fantastic job of promoting reform and what it is that you're doing from a positive perspective, across all of your different briefs. But yes, a clear understanding of the real difficulties that are out there and the brewing problem that the government's got. Jamie, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Have a nice afternoon.
So we're going to try and get a different view. And we're very fortunate to be joined by Mohammed Asif, who's the director of the Afghan Human Rights Foundation. Mohammed, welcome to Talk.
Thank you.
So you've been listening to a lot of the debates that are going on. You're hearing what's going on in the press. You've seen some of the sensational headlines that there have been. Do you think the government has got itself into a bit of a pickle? And what do you think is underpinning it?
First of all, let me explain to your viewers, we see, television, right-wing media, right-wing politicians and others, only 4% of people come to this country, either on a dinghy or on other means, arriving here, seeking asylum. 96% of the population who come into Britain, they come legally. Mm-hmm. But the 4% who come here is making, 24/7 headlines, and it isn't, I'm not going to protect my daughters, from a particular group of asylum seekers or refugees or migrants, as they call them. There are predatory men, and these men are in every part of the society, in every nationality, in every group. But what we have seen on television and in the media and social media is that 4% of the asylum population who arrive here because the legal routes are shut. There are no legal routes.
Yeah, but Mohammed, educate me. Educate me. These 4% that are coming in, that are applying for asylum, say that they're trying to escape from oppression in their own countries or escape from war. That is why they're seeking asylum. And the routes, the mechanisms aren't in there, so they don't join the other 96% who've come in through legal routes. But why is the majority of that 4% that are coming in fighting age men? Why are we not seeing more families who you'd want to see families being safe from the oppression and harm in countries where there's warfare going on? Why is it almost exclusively fighting age men?
It's not only men, I work with asylum seekers 10, 11 hours a day, with different nationality from all across the world. There are women and children, the media wouldn't want you to show them,
Well, I've got a lot of people that I call as friends who are refugees from Afghanistan, asylum seekers from Afghanistan.
But there are a lot of there is quite many women and children, included, who are coming to Britain and seeking sanctuary.
But as a percentage, it's a relatively small percentage.
Yeah, but the other reason is you have to look, men are mostly in trouble in their countries. It's the men who pay the price, whether you're living under the Taliban regime or under the Iraqi regime or the Iranian regime, or, if your life is at risk, men leave.
Yeah, but in Afghanistan and in Iran, it's not the men that are being oppressed, it's the women that are being refused access into schooling, it's the women that are being refused access into jobs. They're being oppressed.
You see, people don't put their honor in the risk of, drug traffickers and who are brutal individual, raping women, raping men. I know today, even I spoke to an asylum seeker, who was sexually assaulted and raped by the smugglers. It's not an easy that you sit here in the television studio and then blame asylum seekers for all the problems in Britain.
I don't think anyone's blaming the asylum seekers for all the problems. But you have to admit there is a problem.
No. When we see the far right, organizing all these protests, led by, fascists and racists. Yeah, there are good people. I'm not saying everybody's far right. There are people, who led the protest. We have photos of them. One picture, particularly photo said, kill them all.
But again, you can
sort of people.
It's very easy in today's society. Mohammed, it's very easy in today's society to pick out one picture and then paint that across everything. The peaceful protests that we saw outside the hotel were by people from the local community who were rightly concerned.
These were all
sorry, if I may, and the majority of those that are being housed in the hotel are not misbehaving. A small minority are misbehaving, but everyone is being tarred with the same brush.
I don't really understand. Maybe this is a question. You're a journalist and you can answer it. If Britain is a lawless country, I don't think so. Britain is a lawless country. There is court, there is the rule of law, there are judges who are very, very independent, independent of the government. If you are a predator or if you commit crime in this country, you should be punished regardless of your, background. But what we have seen, the Tories, Nigel Farage and others in this country, 24/7, blaming asylum seekers for every problem in Britain. The cost of living crisis were not done by asylum seekers, the petrol crisis, energy crisis, mortgage crisis, the inflation crisis. The government is putting poor against poor. And this is and trust me, if you do a survey.
Do you admit that? And we've seen some of the defences that have come out in courts where people have said that their excuse for raping a child was that they didn't realise that it was culturally wrong in this country to do that. And when you get one or two incidents like that the communities of these people in the different hotels don't seem to do anything about it. That is what tars everyone.
We do have the statistics from Home Office, and it is the British government who issues statistics that who rape women, whether it is the indigenous population or whether it's asylum seekers and refugees. I'm not saying, everyone is perfect. As I said, anyone who commits crime, Britain is not a lawless country. There is no kangaroo courts in Britain. There is judges, who, as I said, who are very independent. If you rape a child, you should be punished for your crime.
So if coming into this country, if coming into this country outside the legal routes is a criminal offence, which it is, do you think that
it's not a criminal offence. You're wrong there. The Geneva Convention, which Britain is part of. I was
going to say, if the asylum application has been refused, then do you think the individuals should be deported as rapidly as possible?
You see, I work with a lot. I attend tribunals and I work with the tribunals. And that's my work. And a lot of the cases where it's been refused by the Home Office are won at the tribunals because the Home Office make the wrong decisions.
But then why do you think that, again, we keep hearing this in the press, and it could be an exaggeration, but, a number of those that are coming to seek asylum in the UK have failed asylum applications in at least one, if not more, countries in Europe as they've come through. Why does the UK then pick them up?
You have regimes like the brutal regime in Afghanistan. If I speak a word against...
I know it fairly well.
If I speak a word against the Taliban, that's the end of my life. I will not survive for a week in Afghanistan. The same as in Iraq, in Libya, in Yemen, in Sudan. The dictators and the regimes who are brutal regimes. But yet again, it's the responsibility of Britain. Look at my country. For the past 20 years, Britain occupied my country. After 20 years of misery, hundreds of innocent Afghans were killed by Daesh, Taliban, the Islamic State, British security forces, NATO forces. And after 20 years of failed war, Britain and America...
Well, Mohammed, I have to agree with you in the failed war in Afghanistan, but it was...
But they failed in Iraq, they failed in Libya,
it was Afghanistan allowing Al-Qaeda, I think, to operate with impunity that caused the NATO forces to come in the first place. Finally, because we're coming up against time here, but... do you think that it is appropriate that the asylum seekers are housed primarily in hotels and then moved into houses of multiple occupancy? Why do you think it's inappropriate for them not to be put into camps?
I want to laugh at this question, not at you, but the question, because when asylum seekers come, the moment they arrive on the British shore, the British land, They don't have a list of the hotel, which hotel, Everett Cooper, please give me Hilton, please give me the Sheraton. They have no choice.
I'll change my holiday applications then.
It's not their choice, who give a letter to the Home Secretary.
But they do know that they're going to be put into a hotel.
It is not their choice. It's the responsibility of day-to-day government, whether they were the Tories or the Labour. They have the responsibility. And I tell you this, do a survey and go to every hotel and I will accompany you, free of charge. I will not charge you.
But do you think it would be appropriate?
No, just give me 1 minute. You ask every single asylum seekers, in the hotel. They're not happy in the hotel. They're isolated from the community. They're not allowed to work. They're paid £9 a week. £9 a week in London is not even one-way, bus ticket in London. People want to contribute. People want to rebuild their life. People want to live in a society where they can, feel peace and a sense of belonging. If you, currently,
that'll happen as soon as they get processed. And the government has said the government has said that they're increasing the processing capacity. But do you think until they get properly processed and an asylum decision has been made, that it would be right to house them in tented camps?
No. It's not, like the old imperialist era where Britain occupied Africa and other countries and putting people into concentration camps.
Mohammed,
this is a civilized society.
The defense is not, it's not concentration camps. I've lived in tented camps for.
Remember the Africana in Africa.
I've lived in tented camps for months and months and months as I've been serving the country. So, but it's interesting to get your views. Mohammed Asif, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Folks, we're off for another quick break now.
They should all be processed immediately and be deported. And those 138 odd in the Epping Hotel, for example, they've got until September the 12th, so they've got 3 weeks. Process them rapidly, reject them all because they've come here illegally, and deport them. And if there's a crossover, then yes, people need to be housed in former military camps. What's wrong with some good UN-type tents? And let's deport them. Germany's deporting people to the likes of Afghanistan. We should be doing the same.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So I'm clearly only a brief interloper because that last little sequence that you saw before I came back didn't have my picture on it. But hey, you've got my picture now. And some of you have been calling in and texting in on 0344 499 1000 and texting on 87222. And we've got a couple of voice notes, but they're for subjects we're going to talk later. Let me get on to some of your texts to start with. Text from Alison. If they could build a Nightingale hospital so quickly, then they should convert aircraft hangars into hostels and give them the very basics to survive. Alison, couldn't agree with you more. We could do that very quickly indeed. A text from Terence. If over 200,000 people can be accommodated at Glastonbury, surely it's not beyond the wit of man to build a Glastonbury-type high fenced area, somewhere remote away from anywhere to house these men in tents. Food vans can deliver basic food daily. They will soon return back to the country of origin and, more importantly, dissuade others from breaking into our country. It just requires the will of the government, aka the civil service, to do it. Lockdown showed us that anything is possible if there is the will to do it. I think the one caveat I'd put in that, Terence, I agree with you completely, but we can't play the music that there would be out of a lot of the bands at Glastonbury, because that's probably against the Geneva Convention, would fall under the auspices of torture and would be illegal. But yes, good point. Text from Callum. Good luck. Great job so far, Philip. Callum, fivers in the post. Brilliant first guest with Chloe. She's my favourite, of course. I'm surprised I hadn't got the chance to talk to her before. It's good. And good to hear an ex-military man making great sense. Sorry, I'll change that for the next few hours. We'll stop the sense. Billy from Yorkshire. It's great to know where you're from. If you can, when you're putting a text in, just say where you are. We'll give a shout out to that part of the UK. Talk. We house illegal migrants back home in their own houses, in their own countries, with their own wives and kids, which they have abandoned. Sick of this charade, now open our army. Now our army are defending foreign borders whilst ours are wide open to undocumented males from historically unstable countries and hostile countries. Things I believe are getting very dangerous in the UK. Billy, I think your comments reflect a lot of people's thoughts. On protecting our countries, it's not a military task at the minute, it's a Home Office task. The military haven't been asked to do it, and it would be an inappropriate use of the military, but I get your sentiment. So let's go to the first call that's coming in, and I think that is Mark from Lancashire. Mark, what have you got to say?
Hi. Just to be a little bit patient because I've had a stroke. What I want to say is that 51,000 migrants should be given a 6-week training course by the military and sent to the Ukraine. And if they fight for the Ukraine, then they could come back and get British citizenship.
Yes, Mark. Thank you for that. And I understand the stroke. My poor late father had 3 strokes, and the second and third one took his ability to speak at all away from him. So thank you very much indeed for your point. Very interesting. You're not the first person that has said that to me, but about potentially getting these individuals, who are all military-age men, to come into our undermanned military and fill some of the gaps that are there, maybe form Foreign Legion capabilities. But do we want to train them in military tactics and sending them off to Ukraine? That's a potential against the Rwanda deal, but I think someone somewhere will find another legal reason why we can't take these individuals and send them off to a foreign army to fight in a foreign war and to try and help people keep us safe. Because, of course, although the Ukraine conflict is a foreign conflict, then but it's got direct implications on us. And for those that don't think it's got direct implications on us, just look at how much your energy bill rocketed as soon as Russia illegally reinvaded Ukraine way back in February 2022. So, Mark, thank you very much indeed for your call. A good point. But getting back to some more of your texts. Steve in Rochdale. Regarding the relocation of illegals from hotels to HMOs, the reason why they're in hotels is because of the ease of feeding them, the ease of the security for them, and the ease of supplying sporting activities, etc. It's all in one place. If they move them to HMOs, Harris Circo, etc. are going to feed them if the places are going to be all over the place and small. There's no room for catering, etc. Well, it's not just how is Circo going to feed them, but how is Circo going to fulfil the contract? But thank you very much indeed. Please keep the texts and calls coming in. We'll get to the voice note messages in a moment, but it's now time for the news.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So welcome to the second hour of me standing in for Ian Collins. I can't believe the first hour's gone. Should I go, oh, right, only two more to go? No, it's great fun, and it's great fun talking to you, and it's lovely getting your calls, getting your texts, and getting the voice notes. I'm looking forward to those coming in. But in this second hour, what are we talking about? Well, the Ukraine war, and again, back to flags, but I'm going to take flags from a slightly different angle. So, the Ukraine war. In the past week, we've had Vladimir Putin brought in from the cold to former Russian territory, Alaska, and being warmly greeted by President Trump with a firm handshake and a fly past and static display of a B-2 bomber, an F-35 and F-22 advanced jet fighters. Did Putin look phased? I don't think he did. And at the end of their summit, Trump's body language changed. From that very firm handshake and pat on his arm to the end, Trump was trying to look away whenever they went into their very stilted press conference. And it was clear that Trump wasn't happy with everything that had happened in their discussions. And I'm certain that he'd been expertly played by Vladimir Putin, a wily old politician as president, but also old intelligence officer, and by Lavrov, his foreign minister, and the wider team he brought in with him. Gaining nothing from Putin and seemingly leaving many with the impression that Ukraine would be ceding territory, and that would be the only answer that would give something to Putin. In preparation for Keir Starmer going across with European leaders and others, the UK Defence Intelligence made an assessment that it would take 4.4 years and another 1.9 million casualties for the Russians to capture the whole of the areas of the Donbass that they don't hold at the moment. That, when it was put to Donald Trump, and the size of the area that the Russians still had to capture compared to Florida, made him sit up and go, oh, I hadn't realised it was so big and the cost would be there and their advance was so slow. So Putin quite clearly wanted to go and get Donbass back quickly by negotiating it and by trying to get Donald Trump to give it to him. But anyone who says that Putin is winning in the battlefield because he is advancing doesn't actually understand warfare. It is much more complex than that. And those out there that are turning around saying the Ukrainians should give up territory for peace, let me give you a very simple analogy. An armed gang enters your house. They capture your kitchen, your living room, and they shoot one of your children. It is the afternoon, but I'm not going to go into any more detail. They keep shooting at you, but say they will accept a negotiated solution. You let them... they say let them keep the kitchen and you can have your lounge back, and they promise not to shoot anyone anymore, but they're not going to give their guns up. They're not going to do anything else. Or do you want the police to come and kick them out of your house so that you get everything back again? It's a different scale, but it's exactly the same analogy. Should we be trying to force the Ukrainians to give up their kitchen just because someone's shooting at them, or should we be supporting them as a police force so that they can get those that are illegally into their property or into their country out again? Putin in Ukraine is trying to steal something. Then we had Merz, Macron, Maloney, von der Leyen, Rutte, Starmer and Stubb visiting the headmaster's office in the White House. But their collective support for Zelensky seemed to stop another Oval Office ambush. In fact, it even allowed President Zelensky to make a joke at the US journalist who had criticised him for not wearing a suit in the first place, which was quite amusing. If you haven't seen that, go and find the clip. It's really good indeed. But we have to ask, what did we achieve? Are we any closer to peace? And in a moment, I'm going to be chatting to Sean Pinner, a former British Army soldier and former Ukrainian Marine, to get his insights. But before we talk to him, the other thing we're going to talk about this hour are flags. Now, if you want an emotive subject, talk to an Ulsterman or woman about flags. They can imbue a sense of community spirit. They can be colourfully uplifting. However, there can be more sinister consequences to flags in communities, and those that have lived or served in Northern Ireland know this only too well. So we're going to be talking to someone who understands the community in Northern Ireland and understands flags very well because he's a former senior police officer in the police service of Northern Ireland, but he's also a politician now. So he's had to deal with communities, he's had to deal with from a policing perspective, and he's now having to deal with flags from a political perspective. And he's the new member of the Legislative Assembly for North Antrim, so he knows flags and their implications only too well. But before we get on to John, I want to go back to Ukraine. And for Ukraine, we've got a fantastic guest and someone that I talk to on another channel fairly frequently, Sean Pinner, former Ukrainian Marine, ex-British soldier. You know, Donald Trump has ruled out sending US troops to patrol Ukraine instead of he's backing European boots on the ground with American air support. And he's hinted at other support that could be in there. While Britain, France and Germany have committed potential manpower to enforce the peace with Russia. Trump made it clear that Ukraine won't join NATO, and there's been some discussion about some form of security arrangement based on NATO's Article 5, whether it'll be there or not. You know, behind closed doors, world leaders, including Keir Starmer, negotiated a coalition that's willing to, is it protect Ukraine the right word to use? I personally don't think it is, and pushing back against Putin's demands for full control of the Donbass region. So let's speak to Sean Pinner, as I say, former Ukrainian Marine and ex-British soldier who's currently based out in Ukraine. Sean, really good to talk to you on here.
Barney, it's really good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So what have you made of everything that's been going on politically over the last, it's not even a week yet. You know, we seem to have Putin brought in from the cold. We seem to have Zelensky deftly avoiding being ambushed again in the Oval Office. And I haven't quite worked out myself what has come of any of the negotiations, if anything at all. What's your reading?
Well, it was sickening, wasn't it, to see Putin flying into Alaska. I'm a big American fan and brought up in the 80s and the 90s. I was one of those middle-aged men who watched NFL and American football, you know, back then. You know, Carl Lewis, Reagan reigned. I'm absolutely sick that America, really, Putin is landed in Alaska and essentially given the red carpet treatment, which, you know, got to remember, this is an ICC wanted indicted war criminal. You know, America's not a signatory to the Rome Statute. No. But hell, ethics costs nothing. I mean, I wouldn't have had a problem if it was on neutral territory. I wouldn't have had a problem if it was behind the scenes and low key. But this was a spectacle, and that was sickening. This is a guy. I was in Mariupol, for those that don't know, and witnessed, you know, Russia cross the border and slaughter over 25,000 predominantly Russian-speaking Ukrainians, including women and children. And now he's sitting and walking in on a red carpet into a meeting with Trump in America.
No, people don't understand that this is nothing about the Russian language speakers in Ukraine, as Putin keeps trying to say. You know, President Zelensky himself was a Russian language speaker first and foremost, and only ever spoke Ukrainian occasionally. But there's the old adage, you keep your friends close but your enemies closer. And you know, if we go back into some of the real analytics of conflict, your war isn't an activity all by itself, it is diplomacy by other means. So at some stage, no matter how much you like or dislike the opponents that you're having to deal with, you have to sit down and talk to them. And as part of this talking, people have suggested that there might be, if there is some form of peace settlement, Western boots on the ground, but Trump has ruled that out completely. Do you think we are close to any form of settlement? And do you think if there is a settlement that there will be boots on the ground, and what would the task be given to them? What would they be asked to do? Would it be to patrol the borders, or do you think it's something a lot less?
There's a lot to unpack there, and I don't think we've got enough time, to be honest. Essentially, no, I don't think. His principles were really to destabilise the government, denazify Ukraine, to call essentially the Zelensky government illegitimate without even recognising Ukraine as a sovereign country. I don't think his principles have changed. I think he's stalling. I think he's pulling. I think he's doing everything he can to really hold up negotiations. He doesn't want a ceasefire.
Do you think he's playing Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the only alarming thing is that Trump repeats Putin's narratives.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just to the point where he's insinuated that Ukraine's at fault for this, this invasion, which is bizarre. And I think that really has a lot of Ukrainians doubting the Trump administration and their really true agenda. And of course, it's been highly publicized in his wants for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Is he going to sacrifice Ukraine on a ceasefire or a peace deal that's built on a really, a sand foundations and just for a Nobel Peace Prize? I think a lot of people are wondering that.
Well, I think a lot of the global leaders that were there, the European leaders and everything else, will have emphasised to him that they probably have quite a big say when it comes to nominations for Nobel Peace Prizes and who can get them and anything else. But do you think that Ukraine would need NATO forces on the ground? And if so, what would you expect them to do? Would it be an extension of effectively what's happening outside Ukraine at the moment with the training teams, training your basic soldiering skills, more advanced training into formation level activities, repairing equipment outside Ukraine? If all of that could be moved inside Ukraine, do you think that in itself would provide some form of security?
Yes, to put it bluntly, I've been a strong advocate. Knowing and live here, it gives me a different perspective than most. Living next door to Russia for several years, I've lost my house. I've been in part of the invasion. I've been captured and tortured by them. It gives me a slightly different perspective here. I've been a strong advocate of the minute we knew North Koreans were involved, that we should have brought in some sort of deterrent force made up of European countries all the way to the Dnipro River. And I got flack for that. It was, well, you're going to start World War III. Hold on a minute. We didn't start World War III. Russia started World War III if it's going to kick off. But Putin uses that weapon of escalation. It's his major weapon. And I think at the moment that's starting to turn. I think we're at a point now where we are looking at where I said 1 year ago when North Koreans came in, we should be bringing troops in. And I think it would stabilize the region, but it goes against everything that Putin initially invaded Ukraine for. It was because of NATO expansion. Well, Finland, Sweden, that's got bigger. And also, he's going to have, in order to have this peace deal, he's going to have not essentially NATO on his doorstep, but part of NATO troops, trained troops. So they're going to be in Ukraine. Putin's failed this war. He's lost every part of this war already.
I'm glad you're saying that, because that's something I've been saying for quite some time. And the analogy I use is back to Vietnam. The Americans turned around to the Vietnamese and said, we didn't lose a single tactical fight when we were fighting you. And the Viet Cong turned around and went, so? And this is where the war in Ukraine is not just about who has moved another 100 meters in what direction on the front line in the east. That's where lots of people are dying, and that's where a lot of suffering is happening. But it's about all of the other effects at the operational level, whether Russia can continue to support the war, and then what we've seen in the recent negotiations at the strategic level, and they should all be linked. But you're in Ukraine at the minute. How's morale amongst the Ukrainian people? A lot of the time, people are saying that the Ukrainian people just want this to stop, and therefore they'd be quite happy if territory was ceded. What's the reality of what people are thinking?
I know. I say generally the will to fight is still here. I help with casualties and charity with Prevail help remove casualties to the front line, and I'm still surprised at the stories and how chipper they are coming off the front line. Many soldiers go back to fighting. I mean, nobody wants to give up anything, especially now that we've lost so many people defending the country. But you've got to remember, Ukraine has taken back over 50% of the country that Russia gained in 2022. So, Russia have been on the back foot, retreating for quite a while, lost dominance of the Black Sea, lost Syria, their 8-year, foothold in the Middle East. I mean, 1/3 of their tactical bombers have been destroyed. Russia isn't winning. Russia, if they were having it good, would not be talking peace at the moment. They'd be just plowing through. And that is a major indication that the fact that he's talking peace means he either wants to regroup and have another stab later on, or things are going really pear-shaped in Russia.
Well, yeah, Sean, it's quite clear that, and I'm glad you're saying it because it's something that I've been commentating on for quite a while. I think Putin is in a much worse position than people make out, and there's no way, as a former military man, would I want to put a North Korean shell in an artillery piece and be anywhere near it. When the lanyard is pulled, I would want a lanyard that's at least 1.5 kilometres long, and I still would be nervous pulling it. What do the Ukrainians need next from the West? And do you think that there is any political impetus to give them what they need?
Well, I think I've touched on the Trump administration. I think many Ukrainians are really sceptical and really dubious about where his loyalties lie. My personal feeling is I don't think he really cares for Europe or Ukraine as such. I think he's on a different timeline and a different agenda with the peace deal. But Europe, the only thing I really agree with Trump about is Europe needs to spend more in defence, which it's doing. It has been grinding the cogs and the wheels for quite a while. It is supplying support. Whether you can say, is it enough? I don't know. I don't really know. But it was a really good sight to see from a Ukrainian point of view, all the big hitters of Europe going to talk to Trump and showing support for Ukraine. I think that was essential of giving some sort of, hope in these talks that something good might come out of them.
Yeah, well, hope is always there, and it's good to hear that the Ukrainian people are still fighting for what is rightfully theirs. Sean, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Now, coming up next, we're going to go back to your texts and calls. Do give us a ring on 0344 499 1000. Text us by texting TALK to 87222, and of course you can leave a voice note on the original number 0344 499 1000. Thank you.
This is a kind of retribution through the back door, rather like devolution was, to try and break Britain up into regions, or break England up into regions, if you like, and effectively promote the Scottish flag, promote the Welsh flag, and denigrate the St George's Cross, which is why I'm so keen that we do start to fly the St George's Cross. I'm going to buy a flagpole and start flying one from the end of my drive. I think it's time.
Good man.
If there was a peace, so-called peace,
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So the home of common sense, have you got the guts for talk? Some of you have been calling in and texting in on 0344 499 1000 and texting on 87222 or 87222. A couple of your texts to start with. Dave in Sunderland. Hi, Philip. Why aren't all illegal migrants in secure detention centres as in other countries? Was it Starmer when he was a lefty lawyer who secured their golden-plated human rights? Dave, yes, thank you. I don't know. We have to ask the government. I don't think it was Starmer, but who secured the gold-plated human rights, but he is a human rights lawyer, and it was the lawyers that undermined everything and ran interference. And another one. This could be double dipping, Alison. You're back again. I read one out from you earlier, but you are saying, let's see how long Labour Party takes to bring in a law to stop councils or the public going to court to close migrant hotels. Yes, I think that could be something that they try to do. You hope lots of councils and public using legal aid do the same as Epping. Well done, the people of Epping. Yes, it's going to be interesting. But of course, they can't bring a law in at the moment unless they recall Parliament, because Parliament's on recess. So that will be interesting. Now, we've got our first voice note. Let's get a voice note from Becky on Ukraine.
I'm a great fan of yours, so here's a voicemail for you. I'm constantly hearing that if NATO and Russia went to war, that it would be a shoo-in for NATO because of a far superior power. Yet I'm now hearing that European forces can't muster enough troops to defend Ukraine. Can you square that circle for me?
Oh, that's a complex one. Right. How many hours have we got to talk about planning and other bits and pieces? NATO troops, it's not just about troops on the ground. You know, it's about a complete capability that's in there. And that capability ranges from the economics in the countries that are providing military capability to the defence industrial bases that are underpinning it, to the forces that are put together. And if NATO had to put a combined force together to deal with any Russian threat, looking at what the Russians have been able to produce from a concentration of force, we could always put something in that would overmatch them. And that overmatching is not just through the soldiers that we have on the ground and through the numbers of tanks. Poland's got a huge number of tanks. You know, they've just bought 1,000 tanks. They've just bought 1,000 artillery pieces. The UK, we're only converting 143 of our Challenger 2 to Challenger 3, but then we, in a NATO context, can rely on the Poles. We bring in sophisticated aircraft. We've got missiles. We've got the nuclear deterrent. So there's an awful lot more, and it's bringing that full package in, and it's that full package that would overload and overwhelm the Russians and their ability to influence us. But really good question and very good point. So back to another couple of your texts. Andy from Thatcham. Talk, Philip, the best place to house illegal immigrants is France. The EU's no border policy over the past 30 years has caused this, and it's their problem. Well, Andy, we are sending 50 back on a, I think, monthly basis, only for another 50 to be sent in as chosen by the French. That's sending some of them back to France. But then if we've got 500 odd a day coming in, that's not even going to make a tiny dink or stone chip in the paint of the asylum seekers coming across. But I think you're right on the no border policy that was led by Angela Merkel whenever she opened the European borders and welcomed asylum seekers across. She will be regretting that, or certainly the Germans are now regretting that, as we're seeing many European countries move away from the Schengen freedom of movement and reimpose their own borders again. Steve in East Yorkshire. Talk drive down any motorway in the UK and you'll pass large industrial storage sites with warehouses for sale or rent. I think I know where you're going with this. They'll all have CCTV systems installed and are surrounded by security fence. The government should hire these for migrant accommodation, put multiple bunk beds, hire portable toilets, shower blocks, set up catering contract and hire security guards. Far less cost than the hotels and HMOs and safer because the migrants are out of the way. Steve, I've actually stayed in factories which have had no roofs and no sides on them and have been bombed out in tents put up in the factories, and that was perfectly good for me to stay there for 6-9 months or longer. So yes, I agree with you completely. Jane, text from you, put them in guarded council tents or send them back, no in between. We have a consistent answer to our question here. I haven't seen anyone saying something different. Come on, if you've got something different, please give us a call. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love someone to justify why we should be keeping these asylum seekers in a hotel, or moving them to houses of multiple occupancy, or something else. But Jane camps, yes, I agree. Ryan, we shouldn't house them at all, never mind where. The trouble with that, Ryan, is that they're already here. So we've got a problem that we have to deal with, and we're going to have to pick that up. Text remain. Jolly good to have your own show. If only it was my own show. I don't think Ian's going to let me back in again. So we should house our illegal migrants in the same accommodation as the United Nations. Yes, I agree with you completely. Another one from, text from Christine. As the owner of the Epping Hotel has been using it for purposes without required use of change, Epping Council should take legal action against the owner and give them a huge fine, because the owner has made a fortune from trashing Epping. Christine, that is a very, very interesting point. And again, happy to discuss that with people, because there's so many things that come out of that. Yes, the hotel owner will have wanted to make money out of it. But if they were approached by the council, who had been approached by the government, might there have been an assumption that the change of use would have come automatically from some form of central government or something else? That assumption hasn't really been analysed. And of course, Dan Jarvis, the government minister, didn't sit down and discuss the detail. He just tried to deflect, as ministers do, when he was making his comment earlier today. But a very good point, Christine. And I think we're now off for another quick break. No, it's another phone call. Another phone call. I do apologise. Laura Jane in Hampshire, you want to talk about illegal migrants.
Hello, welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you very much indeed. What have you got to say?
Well, I've been saying this to all of our friendly presenters over and over again since Labour came in. They have an agenda. It's as simple as that. That's why Keir Starmer hasn't made any comments on any of these protests. That's why Yvonne, Mr. Balls' wife, Yvonne Cooper,
yes.
hasn't been to any of these places, Yvette rather. All the things that they have brought in are part of their agenda to destroy Britain as we know it. And I know that sounds like a conspiracy theory. I say it over and over again. There is nothing we can do until we get rid of this government. And they are planning much worse, believe you me. But the migrant situation, they're not going to deport them. They're not. As simple as that. And that's why they're keeping, they keep deflecting questions and answers. All of the things that you've been saying makes perfect sense. But the reason is deeper.
Laura Jane, you've said exactly the same thing on my usual slot, was sitting in as presenter's friend with Julia Hartley-Brewer, because I recognise your voice in calling in. And you talk common sense there, you talk common sense here. Maybe we should get you into some of these political positions or talking to the minister. But thank you very much indeed for your thoughts and your comments, and for your very kind words about me sitting in here. It's fun today, I have to say. Now we're going to take a quick break, and after the break we're going to be speaking to John Burrows, a former senior police officer with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and now a politician in the local assembly, and also Unionist Party politician, and we're going to talk flags. But a quick break before that.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So welcome back. I'm Philip Ingram and I'm standing in for Ian Collins. Now, across the nation, patriots are proudly raising the St George's Cross and the Union flag and declaring this is not racist. It's about pride in our home. Communities are coming together to coat the streets in England's flag and the Union flag, celebrating British identity and unity. But not everyone agrees. Some councils have been caught removing the flags. We'll talk to local councils in a moment, but I want to start with getting a word from John Burrows. John Burrows is a former senior police officer in the police service of Northern Ireland and now an Ulster Unionist Party politician in the local assembly in Northern Ireland. And coming from Northern Ireland, if ever flags were an issue that raised issues in communities and issues for the police, John is the one person who will know all about it. John, really good to talk to you.
Likewise, Philip, good to speak to you.
How's life as a politician before we get on to flags? Because you've been in post now for, is it in days or weeks that we're measuring?
The start of my third week, so it's a baptism of fire. So look, I'm getting up, meeting the communities in North Antrim where I represent, and a great shout out for North Antrim to any of your listeners. It's one of the most beautiful places in the United Kingdom, with the Giant's Causeway and the famous Causeway Coast and the Bushmills Distillery. So
I can vouch for that, and Bushmills is one of my favourite tipples, so it's in there. But we're here talking about flags. You've had to deal with the consequence of flags put up ostensibly to bring communities together, but they've been hijacked by different groupings and different organisations, and it's turned into something all more sinister. What warnings would you give the police in the mainland UK and across England, and the groupings that might be having a little eye on the local people who are out of a sense of pride putting these flags up, but it can be exploited in a different way?
Absolutely. And first of all, someone who is a proud UK citizen feels very British. I understand people want to display their patriotism to their country. It's something I share. I've served in uniform. My forefathers have. But this is laden with difficulties. And just before I get on to the sort of policing issue, I think one of the things that should be learned from the Northern Ireland experience, where we have flags in various parts of Northern Ireland up lampposts, is you end up with, instead of the sort of the solemnity and the majesty of your national flag that means so much to you, you end up with it being proliferated, it being diminished, and you having just a lot of sometimes very tatty flags hanging on lampposts. And I think, it sometimes actually diminishes our flag when we overuse it without any sense of occasion or formality. So I think that's the first thing. And the second is that you very quickly get a proliferation of this, in the sense that what you'll see in Northern Ireland is you'll see the Ulster flag and the Union flag on lampposts in Unionist areas, pretty similar to the St George Cross and the Union flag in the areas you're talking about. And then suddenly you'll get the flag of Israel, because there's an identity with Israel. And we'll see some Ukraine flags. And then on the other side, on the sort of nationalist side, you'll have the Irish tricolour, and you'll find the Palestinian flag, and you'll find all kinds of other flags. And this is where you end up creating problems. So it becomes very, very difficult. And we actually now in a situation whereby you have so many flags, people are proposing a quango, with probably a very expensive commissioner to come in and try and actually find a way through regulating when flags go up and flags come down. So there are some of the risks. And just before I'll make a final point, some places do this really well. So there are some parts of Northern Ireland where, for example, over the 12th of July, which is a very big occasion for the Protestant Unionist community, celebrating King James's victory, flags will go up for a short period of time and they will come down. And that's done in a very organised way, in a very proud way, and promotes community consent. But where it just becomes a free-for-all, you end up with massive problems. Yeah, but the risks, if it becomes a them and us bit, whether that's proliferated through local councils or proliferated through local communities who are butting up against each other, the risks are significant and they're very, very real, and that's what would impact the policing of this. Oh, 100%. It then becomes a totemic issue. So look, we had weeks of riots in 2013. They were called the flag dispute. And what happens here is, look, City Hall used to have the Union flag flying all year round. And that wasn't an issue. As flags became more controversial because they became, literally put up to demarcate territory. Actually, sorry, that was my dogs just jumped up. You make the flag almost toxic. You make it contested. You make it a them or us. And what then happened was that actually leaks into the official flying of the flag.
Yep.
Where it should be flown at Remembrance Sunday and Remembrance Day and other big events. So you ended up with the flag properly flown over the City Hall. One party that would see themselves, the Alliance parties, kind of like the middle of the road party, the Liberal Democrats, decided to take it down and only have it up in designated days, and we had days of rioting. And I'm convinced that actually if we had more common sense and consensus around how we treat flags on lampposts, we would still have the flag flying high over the City Hall.
Yeah.
It's happened recently in other parts of Northern Ireland where people are trying to take them down from remembrance war memorials.
Yeah, and the other thing that strikes me is, when we start debating flags, it gets into politicians like yourself having to debate it in local assemblies or whether it be local councils or elsewhere. It's taking up political capital, time that should be devoted to more local issues rather than dealing with something that can easily become divisive.
Yes, so something that should be relatively non-contentious becomes something divisive. Because it's very symbolic and tangible, you end up spending a lot of political capital on it, and you end up in a situation whereby when you have this proliferation of flags, and all different kinds of flags come in, the police are sometimes expected to remove flags. And again, we all know our police service are under-resourced across the UK. There's lots of serious crime for them to be dealing with. And you'd have people who want them shimmering up lampposts to take down a flag. And as soon as they do, someone will replace it and put another one back up again. So it becomes so unenforceable if you actually go down a path. And it's a Pandora's box. And I would say to people who really believe in their country, be very careful about going down this route of demarcating your area by putting up flags. Well, it's a dangerous territory, and you tend to actually lose in the long term.
Yeah. Well, John, that is a very good point to finish on before I go and talk to Richard Parkin from Birmingham City Council. So thank you very much indeed for your understanding. Richard, I don't know whether you had the chance to listen to what John Burrows was saying there. You're the Birmingham City Councillor for Sutton Redcap, the Sutton Redcap ward, and the police are investigating St George's flags being painted on roundabouts. I am from Hillsowen and seeing on flags are on lampposts around Hillsowen, both the St George's Cross and the Union flag on different lampposts. And I have to say, the new ones are looking quite colourful and it brightens up some very dull roads. But I do understand the wider implications. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good afternoon. I think the wider view here in Birmingham amongst most residents is that they're supportive of the flags that are flying around the area. I think there's a sense of pride and patriotism when the flags go up. And unfortunately, the way the Birmingham City Council have approached this issue has actually thrown fuel onto the fire, and they've actually made it worse. And in fact, what it's also done, it's not only galvanised the groups, and also it's attracting more funding for more flags. So as quickly as they're going down, they're going back up again. But it's also now, as you can see nationally, from Manchester to the Isle of Wight, from Norwich to Newcastle, towns and cities around the country, it's spreading across the country. And I think people have had enough. They're frustrated at being ignored for so long. They want to reclaim their national identity and their sense of national pride. And I think we should welcome that. And I think the rush to get them taken down by Birmingham City Council is doing them no favours. Yeah.
But we've had, there's online, and I've seen their tweets. Do I call them tweets or do I call them X's? It doesn't matter. There'll always be tweets to me. Operation Raise the Colours campaign is encouraging public flag displays, and that's gaining traction. But there are increasing suggestions that there are links to extreme right-wing groups breaking into it. And we look at, you mentioned the flag's been taken down. Birmingham Council removed some St George's flags. Tower Hamlets in London have removed St George's flags. But it seems that if there's a Palestinian flag that's flying, they're left flying for longer or on display longer. Do you think that it's right that we see outrage against these double standards coming across from our public?
Absolutely. I think there's three things that have particularly rankled the people of Birmingham. Firstly, there's the double standards. I mean, there seems to be a two-tier policy. I drive around the city quite frequently, and there have been Palestinian flags flying for 18 months or 2 years that have been left completely unattended, and nobody's bothered to take those down. So when the council starts suddenly saying, we've got a health and safety issue and they need to come down straight away, on the eve of VJ Day commemorations, let's not forget, and at the same time, they're hoisting up Pakistan flag outside the council house. They're lighting up the library in the Pakistan flag colours and so on. This isn't a sense of being racist. It's not racist to be patriotic. And, this is our country and our flag, and we should feel proud to fly our flag wherever we want to, whenever we want to. And Birmingham City Council have suddenly, the council's bankrupt. You've probably heard about the rats and the bin strike, which is now into...
only a lot, yes.
into its 9th month. But all of a sudden, with bins not collected, fly tipping everywhere, fly posting not removed, the council have suddenly found all the resources in the world to throw at tearing down British flags and Union Jack flags and the flags, St George's Cross. So residents are absolutely furious about it, because the only thing the council seems to do quickly is to remove the symbol of national pride and identity, and that's also causing a lot of upset.
Yeah, but do you think there's a danger that with the councils doing this, what they're doing is they're creating a backlash from the local communities who will then potentially turn more to some of the more extreme right-wing groups that will move in and exploit that difference of opinion between the councils and the local communities, and this might turn into something that could become something completely different and what local communities wouldn't want. What are you picking up from on the ground?
I can't imagine any other country in the Western world having this kind of conversation we're having in this country. We've got a Union Jack and a St George's Cross, and it's our national flag. And the silent majority of people who are now speaking, are now shouting out from the rooftops, this is our identity, this is our country, this is our flag. There's nothing to be ashamed of there. I mean, can you imagine them having this conversation in America? I mean, they've got their national flag flying outside every public building, on classrooms, all over the place. Yet here we all have this angst about, it's going to be claimed by other groups, but let's claim it for the people of the country. This is our country and our flag, and I don't. That argument doesn't wash with me. We don't not wave our flag because we're worried about the extremists who we obviously don't want anything to do with. We're talking about the majority of people in this country.
Yeah, well, Richard, on that rallying call, and I have to say that in Long Lane in Hillsowen, it is much more colourful with the flags that are flying from the lampposts. I do understand where it could go, and it always makes me slightly nervous, but I do enjoy it and enjoy the colourful sights that it brings in, and it brightens the community up. Richard, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Now, before we go to break, we're going to go to another caller, and we've got Linda from New South Wales who wants to talk about flags, and then I understand you're going to talk about how Australia deals with migration. Linda, good to talk to you.
Hello, good afternoon, or good evening to you. I agree with Richard. We have these things about flags in Australia with the Aboriginal flag and changing, because we've got the Union Jack plus the stars on ours, and it's been an ongoing argument. But the thing is that we put the Australia flag and the Aboriginal flag underneath each other, and then the state flag goes under it. If you're in WA, you get the swan or blah, blah, blah. So I agree with Richard. So flags are, they're community. So, yeah, let's push that one off. And Starmer should bloody... sorry, I'm an Australian. I was going to be very rude there.
Yes, I think I can work out what you were going to say, but yes, the flags are an issue. Linda, it's interesting to hear New South Wales and to know that we've got listeners in New South Wales. So thank you for tuning in. But yes, I've enjoyed visiting New South Wales and seeing the different flags that are there, and we've got a completely different attitude to them in this country than a lot of places around the world, as Richard mentioned with the United States. Linda, thank you for your points. Oh, sorry, you got something else?
I do have something else.
Yes, go on.
Okay, I want to talk about your immigration problem.
Yes.
Because we solved ours. All right, I'll do a little brief history without... My father calls me Auntie Carrie because I tend to talk too much, so I'll be quick. So in 2001, our government said, no, we're not, no.
I remember it well. You had somewhere to send anyone that tried to come into Australia in little boats. They were intercepted and taken off and processed outside of Australia, and virtually none then were allowed to set foot on Australian territory. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. We sent the Navy up, and they went between us and Indonesia, and we did an agreement with Indonesia, and Indonesia kept their promise. So we put them off on Nauru.
Mm-hmm.
We did it.
And Nauru's the island that they were processed on?
Yes.
Yep.
And it was good for Nauru because they got economy, because they weren't doing real well. Now, all these years later, we get the odd boat, but Nauru's still going.
Yep.
So the problem with the poor, I'm going to say it, the poor bastards, they get themselves on a bloody dinghy and they're coming from Indonesia over the top parts of Australia. If they don't land in Darwin, they're going to be eaten by crocodiles. They're going to die of bloody thirst. There's no food out there. You know, it's just like...
Well, yeah, I know. I get it, Linda. Maybe there's a potential solution there. Maybe we could import some crocodiles from Australia if we got any spare. But if Nauru is still working, if you could send us the contact details of the people that are responsible for that, we might slip those into our politicians in this country to give them somewhere to send potential asylum seekers and use that as a deterrent, because they've binned Rwanda, which to me seemed as if it would have worked. But Linda, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm afraid we have to go and take a break, but coming up next we're going to come to some more of your texts and calls. So again, if you want to get through, please give us a call on 0344 499 1000 or text talk to 87222. Thank you.
Inflation's been creeping up now for a few months, and what's driving this, Mike, is it's pretty much food inflation. It's continuing to go up, so that's it, 4.9%, and this is not the direction that we want things to be going. And what we've seen, Mike, if they were talking last week, Rachel Reeves, about the economy and comparing ourselves to some of the other nations. So let's do that with the inflation figures. France, 0.9%, Germany, 1.8%, so two of the big powerhouses of Europe, they're below that Bank of England target. So the government needs to look now, what are they doing wrong because inflation's so high?
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome to the home of common sense. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Ian Collins today, and I'm getting back to some of your texts. Of course, you've texted in saying talk to 87222, or you've given us a call on 0344 499 1000. First text I'm going to is Steve from Cool Island. Now, Cool Island is just outside what was my hometown in Northern Ireland. Steve, you say, hi Philip, really enjoying your debut. Thank you very much. Indeed, Steve, that's another fiver in the post. Asylum seekers waiting a decision should be given a choice to volunteer for unpaid work, litter picking, graffiti removal, etc., putting their time to good use, and that would be better than having them bored and susceptible to nefarious activities. Steve, what a good idea. Now, that's something that hopefully our politicians are listening into and would start to add something to the communities who are protesting at their presence, and maybe they could see some good coming from them. A text from Reg. As soon as these guys get put in HMOs, the houses of multiple occupancy, they get access to kitchens. How long is it before people's houses start going up in flames because they don't know how to use cookers? Ooh, Reg, I think you're making assumptions there. They may not know how to use cookers. They may not know how to use our cookers, but they're not particularly difficult. If I can work out how to use a cooker, I think even an asylum seeker that's coming in will be able to do that. Lilia, a text from you. Lovely to see you today, Philip. What a nice surprise. Mohammed says 4% like it's not a lot. It is. It's too much, and the legal routes being closed is a straight lie. Why are these men not going to neighbouring countries? Why travel so far to Europe and the UK? Leila, you make a very clear point, and not a lot. Since we've been gathering statistics, there's been more than every member of the British Armed Forces has come in, mostly fighting age men, into this country. That is quite a lot. So enough of the text, and we're now going to take a quick voice note from Wayne, who's speaking about flags.
We're not allowed to paint red crosses on white mini roundabouts, but the council is allowed to paint zebra crossings in rainbow colours, other pathways and walkways with rainbow flags. I mean, that's perfectly fine, but a little red cross on a white roundabout is distracting, dangerous. I mean, come on. Two-tier everything in every walk of life at the minute. It's just mad. Two-tier Britain is what we should be called.
Oh, come on, Wayne. You're talking common sense. That's exactly what we want on here. Come on, more common sense callers, more common sense voice notes. Wayne, you're spot on. We've got a caller now. Loretta, I understand you want to speak about flags and you're calling from Bristol.
Yeah, that's right. I just wanted to say from experience of living in Virginia in the States in the early 2000s, it was rural, so I'm not talking about the big cities, but even in the big cities you see the American flag. But I would say at least 30% of houses have an American flag on their front lawn or from their house, and every school has the American flag. And I used to think, how patriotic is that? And why don't we see flags in the UK? We've got all this hassle about flags, but surely we're just showing patriotism to the UK, and it's about time.
Yes, Loretta, I've travelled extensively in the United States and I've seen the same. And you look in the American schools and I don't know whether they still do it, but it used to be that children would swear an allegiance to the flag as part of their first assembly before they went off to the normal school day.
Yeah, they definitely do that every morning, and I thought that's a nice cohesion of all the cultures and all the people that have emigrated to America to keep everybody together, to make them feel American rather than feel still part of their own country when they're living in America, if you see what I mean.
Do you think we sorry for interrupting, but do you think we spend enough time trying to focus on what the values and standards are to be British rather than trying to allow people to maintain their own separate cultural identities first and foremost? Should we take a leaf out of the American lesson?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what people do in their own homes is one thing. They can have their own country in their own homes, but as soon as they're out of their house, surely they're in Great Britain.
Yes. And the United Kingdom. So with all the asylum seekers that are coming in, I'm going to put you in the spot here, because it's the question that we asked at the very beginning. If we shouldn't keep them in hotels, where do you think we should house our illegal immigrants?
Oh God, that is so difficult to answer that question. But I liked the idea of the Australian lady saying that they'd put the Navy out to stop the boats coming in the first place.
Yes, it's something that we hear quite frequently as to how to stop the boats. But of course, our Prime Minister said smash the gangs. But Loretta, yeah, very good insights. Again, you're talking common sense. So you're exactly the right person to be listening to us. Thank you very much indeed for your call. We've got another caller, and that's Paul from London. And you want to talk about immigration, I understand. Paul, what have you got to say?
Yeah, just a quick one, Philip. It's a great show, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was worked with the army, British forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you'll probably know that the accommodation there was tents, but it weren't just like sort of field tents. They were temporary deployed accommodation, 2000 it was called, and it was made by a company called KBR UK. We're not in Afghanistan or Iraq anymore. I just wonder what happened to that accommodation. Could that be used, for example?
That's a very good point. I think a lot of it was left behind. Certainly, KBR, I know, is a big American company, and the Americans left most of their equipment behind. And I wasn't fortunate enough on many operations to stay in some of the nice palatial tents that have been put up. A lot of the time, mine were the old smelly, green, damp canvas tents that leaked enormously and had no ground sheets and very little heating. No, a very good point, Paul. So let's get back to some of your texts and messages again. Next text, I think, is from Gary. And Gary, you said, Philip, the simple truth about the war in Ukraine is that the longer it goes on, then whatever peace deal is agreed becomes less about what is fair and more about just finding a pragmatic way of ending the war. The harsh reality for Zelensky is that any peace deal is going to have to involve surrendering some land, but if he rejects that argument out of hand, then this war is just going to drag on indefinitely. Then in 3 to 5 years' time from now, when the West is suffering from war fatigue, he may just find that he has to settle for a much worse peace deal than the one that is going to be put in front of him in the coming weeks. In other words, now might be just the best bargaining position he's ever going to be in. Gary, I understand your sentiment completely, but I think that is for President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people to decide when is the point that they want to go for peace and what they would be happy to settle with as a settlement. This is something that I don't think should be imposed on them by the President of the United States or us. And one final text from Malcolm, Southampton. Good afternoon, Philip. Enjoying the show. Would risk assessments be required for the impact of use of change where persons of unknown identity and history would be housed and have freedom of movement? Surely this would be essential for due diligence and community safeguarding. Malcolm, I think you're 100% right, but we don't know what was done and what wasn't done. We just know the courts said it was illegal. That's it for this hour. You'll get me coming back again in a few moments' time. But until then, I think we're going to have a nice break and some more news.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So we've had 2 hours of common sense so far. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Ian Collins today. On my debut behind the set, I haven't pressed this big red button that says, do not push. I'm tempted. Now, I remember I had a chance to fly in a Harrier jump jet one day, and you've got the ejection seat handle between your legs, and the more you fly, the more your hand gets attracted to it, just like this big red button. But anyway, what are we talking about this hour? The economy and facial recognition. So inflation is up to 3.8%, when the Bank of England target is 2%. It's predicted to reach 4% in September. That's good for pensioners, because that's whenever the inflation figure is used to give pension rises. But that's going to mean more money has to be found by the Chancellor. The inflation is up because they say airfares and food is going up. And who'd have thought that if you hit farms, haulage companies, warehouses, distribution centres and shops with additional costs for minimum wages, additional employers' national insurance contributions, and uncertainty with the inheritance tax for farmers, then prices would go up. You'd have thought a trained economist or even someone that had worked in accounts before would know this. It seems fairly basic. Business costs are up, prices are up, more businesses are going bust, employment is going down, and you just have to look at our high street. You know, some of the big names. Poundland is suffering, closing stores. Claire's Accessories, I read the other day, is in real difficulty and suffering, and retail crime is through the roof. We've got a growing population of illegal asylum seekers that are causing us anxiety across the country, but costing us lots of money. And where is the government smash the gangs? Instead, we're having our pockets smashed. There will be more pocket smashing. The amount the government pays to borrow money is up to 5.4%. That disastrous Liz Truss budget that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer keep referring back to only had government borrowing up to 5.1%, but they used that figure to hound Liz Truss out. Should Rachel Reeves follow her? That cost of borrowing costs us more money. And remember, there was this 22 billion black hole that no one could really find apart from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. It's now risen apparently to 40 billion or 50 billion and then back to 40 billion, depending on which government minister seems to be talking about it. Since the new government has been in, if they added an extra 18 billion pounds to the black hole, that does not bode well for their financial proprietary. So we haven't even had other things coming in to try and fill the black hole that the government said they inherited, and we're hearing about more property tax based on the value of a property, and that's before capital gains tax kicks in if you sell your primary home, which is another proposal that we're hearing. It seems that if you never worked for this country, you get everything, but if you work, you buy stuff, you're taxed on what you buy, you're taxed on what you earn, your employer is taxed on your efforts, and you're taxed again if you die, and if your property gets sold, you get taxed again. And very soon, we're likely to see pensioners who are living on less than the national living wage falling into brackets where they're going to get taxed, potentially next year. And when will we see the complacency that we seem to have in government? We have big bills to pay, more for defence, health, and an extra 18 billion growing black hole. And that's before I start on facial recognition. But we'll get onto that in a moment. You know, is Rachel Reeves losing her grip on Britain's finances as the borrowing costs hit the highest level since 1998? The soaring gilt yields are driving up interest on Britain's debt, leaving Rachel Reeves scrambling to pay back even more money and paving the way for more tax hikes. So let's get an insight to this and speak to Michael Simmons, who's the economics editor at The Spectator. Michael, good to have you on.
Hello.
Go on. Is it a complete disaster? Is it the disaster that I think it seems to be? You're the expert. I'm just reading what is in the headlines.
Yeah, look, I think you are right. This is the latest piece of news that adds to the real sort of economic crisis that we're in. The real shock with today's figures was how it's all been reported as how this is all unexpected. It was unexpected for the Bank of England. It was unexpected for the Chancellor, and it was unexpected for the economic establishment. But for anyone that's been, doing their grocery shopping for the last few weeks, you notice that things are getting more and more and more expensive. And as you outlined, a lot of this, is the fault of the policies of the Chancellor, specifically that £25 billion raid on employers' national insurance. But I would also say that the Bank of England has, questions to answer here too, because it's them that are mandated to try to use the tools at their disposal to keep interest rates down, to keep inflation down at 2%. But just a fortnight ago, they basically said, we're not as worried about inflation anymore. We're now starting to worry about the labour market. And then they went ahead and cut interest rates. And, lo and behold, inflation still seems to be rising. They say it will peak at 4% in September and then fall away. That's going to be terrible news if it does just peak at 4% at 4%, for households, but also for the Chancellor, who's got to fill that gap. But given how wrong they've been in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if it shoots up past 4% and this, second cost of living crisis really continues.
Do you think this is down to politics, where policies that have been decided without doing the sums beforehand to work out what the financial implications are going to be? And we look at here the impact that has been on capital gains tax, on targeting the wealthy, on targeting private schools, on you hitting the elderly with the winter fuels allowance, and everything else that we're seeing? Or do you think this is down to the naivety of a new government who don't know what's going on? Or what do you think is causing it?
Well, a lot of this is, entrenched for a long time. It's to do with actions actually from the previous government and the Bank of England over years and years. But what's actually interesting for this government, who would like to say it's international factors, is when we had the sort of COVID and Ukraine bout of inflation, that was more or less on track with every other country in the G20. They sort of saw the same thing. But now our inflation and our borrowing costs are breaking away from Europe. They're breaking away from the G7. So that makes it look a lot more like that it's problems created by this government. But it's not just their policies. I think it's that, markets, who we might think, who cares really about traders and financial people? But ultimately, these are the people that we borrow money from every day to make Britain going, make Britain keep going. And fundamentally, they've lost all faith that the maths of, Britain as a nation adds up. They just think that this is an aging population, a population that's not growing, a population that has a tax base that's too reliant on the wealthy, actually. And as a result, they've got no confidence in our economic future, which is why they're making it more and more expensive to lend money to us. But that's also made worse by the sort of flip-flopping that we do have from the Chancellor. It means that they can't make any long-term decisions about investing and what they want to do with this country. Just a few months ago, we had the Chancellor saying, I'm not really going to go anywhere near tax in this next budget. And now every day, the Treasury seems to be flying the kite for a new policy, some of which you've outlined. That may be great for the Treasury for gauging what voters and backbench MPs are prepared to wear, but it just totally freaks out, markets and moneylenders.
Well, I'll come on to taxes in a minute, but you're an expert in this area. I think most people understand inflation because they can see the prices going up in the shops. But this gilt yield statistic that's out there, and the fact that everyone was horrified when it went up to 5.1% on Liz Truss's budget, and it's now predicted potentially to get up to 5.65% in the 30-year gilt yields, or it may be there already. What impact does that have on individuals, or is this just government passing money around different departments or different countries? It's not going to actually have any real effect?
Well, the first effect obviously is on the government. It makes the government's black hole harder, which affects all of us because it either means they're going to do public spending cuts or tax rises. But it actually has a more direct effect on house owners and homeowners and mortgage holders too, because as much as the bank sets the interest rate, and it was great news that they cut it if you're about to remortgage, the bank that's lending you that money is partly doing that through the process of these gilts as well. Mm-hmm. And what you would normally expect to see as interest rates come down, you would expect to see the gilt yield also come down. But that's now, gone kind of inverted. So the interest rate from the central bank came down. The markets looked at that and said, I don't believe really really that inflation has gone away. So the yield is kept going up, which means we now be in a situation where you would read the headlines about the interest rate and think, oh, great, this is going to mean my mortgage is going to be cheaper when I come to refinance. But if banks don't, realize that on the actual markets, then that's not going to happen. So it sounds all technical and it sounds like something to worry about for bankers, but it's something that households really need to be conscious of, because it means, one, tax rises, and it secondly means mortgage costs not going down anytime soon.
So I think that explains quite clearly why whenever we hear the Bank of England interest rates dropping, our mortgage rates don't drop automatically the same day and we start to hit that. But you mentioned that it therefore costs the government more money. This black hole has grown. A, was there a 22 billion black hole in the first place? B, is it down to financial impropriety if that's gone up to 40 billion? And the government's not really saying much about that. And what are you thinking of Rachel Reeves's, or what is being reported as Rachel Reeves's plans to tax high-value homes and to provide some form of additional tax when it comes to people selling their primary residence, which has gotten a tax exemption at the moment?
Well, on your first point, I think the £22 billion black hole, there was no evidence, and the OBR looked and they didn't see that that was a real thing. There certainly is a black hole now, though, and there was in the spring too. And this is just simply because this country does not bring in enough in taxation to pay out for everything the state needs to do, and increasingly to pay off this inflation-linked debt. So that is going to get worse. It's not necessarily just because of the actions of the Chancellor, although certainly a big part of it is the U-turns on things like the winter fuel allowance, the benefits cuts. It's also partly because the OBR forecasts have been too optimistic. So basically they tell the Chancellor that she has more money than she actually has, and then 6 months down the line, when they go to count it up, it turns out she didn't have that money in the first place, and now she's got to find it from somewhere else. In terms of the policies she's looking at, anything that would make it harder for people to sell their houses, I think, is going to be really bad for Britain's biggest problem, which is the fact that it is really hard to get on the housing ladder. To move around. I also think all these sort of tax ideas she's talking about don't really touch the sides in trying to make Britain's books kind of balance. And then I think, unfortunately, and this always makes me very unpopular with Spectator readers, and I'm sure your viewers and listeners when I say this, her only option, given she's not going to seriously shrink the state, is to put taxes up on all of us. And by that, I mean, put the basic rate of income tax up. Now, I don't want that to happen, but it's something that would bring in that much money and would be applied to everyone. That's the only kind of move that gets you anywhere near sort of balancing the books. I think, mansion tax here, a tax on profits there, don't really touch the sides.
But do you think politically, having said they're not going to touch a number of main taxes, it was in the manifesto, they've reiterated time after time after time, do you think politically they could survive that?
No, I think, and for that reason, she's not going to do that. She will not break her manifesto pledge here. But I think the Chancellorship is a bit like hot potato. I think that policy of increasing basic rates at this stage is basically inevitable. And it's a question of how long you can put that off. She'll not want to be the Chancellor that does it. It may not happen until after the next election. But at some point, someone is going to have the unfortunate job in number 11 of selling that policy to a public that's not going to like it at all.
Well, yes, and it seems that millionaires aren't liking it as well. We've got, I think, 16,500 millionaires are forecast to disappear out of the UK in 2025. Everyone says, yeah, but who cares? We should be taxing them more, taxing them wealth. How important are wealthy people to actually underpinning the economy of our country?
Well, they're very important. I mean, firstly, for the obvious reason that a lot of them, employ people, they create lots of jobs. But also, if you look at how income tax is shared in this country, the top 1% and even the top, 0.1% account for an incredible amount of tax. For the top 0.1%, I think it's something like 12% of all income tax that is paid in. So if one of the wealthiest taxpayers, just one, was to leave the country, you need over 1,000, average earners to suddenly come into the country or take up a job or whatever to replace that tax. So we are, incredibly reliant on these people. And that's not to say, we should all be sympathetic for the very nice lives of the super rich, but they do contribute a lot, both in terms of employment, but also, the revenues that they give to the exchequer.
Yeah, they spend a lot, they contribute a lot, and therefore they pay a lot for those that aren't paying anything. Michael, it's been a real pleasure getting your insights and getting greater understanding to what is a complex area. Now, I think we're going to take another break. Back in a few moments.
Inflation's been creeping up now for a few months, and what's driving this, Mike, is it's pretty much food inflation. It's continuing to go up, so that's it, 4.9%, and this is not the direction that we want things to be going. And what we've seen, Mike, if they were talking last week, Rachel Reeves, about the economy and comparing ourselves to some of the other nations. So let's do that with the inflation figures. France, 0.9%, Germany, 1.8%, so two of the big powerhouses of Europe, they're below that Bank of England target. So the government needs to look now, what are they doing wrong because inflation's so high?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So welcome back. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Ian Collins today. And I can't believe that we've been going for almost 2.5 hours. Before I get to some more of your text calls and voice notes, we've got a couple of pieces of news that have broken very recently. UK adds new designations to the Russia sanction list. The UK has added 8 new designations under its Russia sanctions regime, a government update shows. The new sanctions seem to be against a mixture of individuals and companies and will target crypto networks used by Russia to circumvent existing sanctions. And the second one is that Russia hits back at British sanctions with counters, according to state media. Russia has launched counter-sanctions against the UK. Tit for tat, here we go. Now Moscow has retaliated in kind state media, RIA Novosti reports the Russian state media site citing the foreign ministry says that they imposed a number of media representatives, NGOs, consulting structures, an expert community of Great Britain. They put sanctions against. I wonder who's on that media list. I've avoided it so far. Right, let's get your voice notes and texts and calls. We've got a voice note from Gavin who wants to talk about flags.
I like to go around the world a lot on holiday destinations like Turkey, Egypt, and every hotel I go to has their flags draped all over them. That, to me, personally, makes me very happy because I like to know I'm surrounded by locals who take pride in their country. Why can't we? Let's sort it out.
Gavin, I couldn't agree with you more. We need to have pride in our country. We need to be proud to be British. Now, we've got our first caller of this hour, and that's Ian from London. And Ian, I think you want to talk about migrant hotels. What do you want to say?
Well, first, I'd like to say congratulations on moving from the right hand of the studio to the left hand of the studio.
Thank you very much indeed, young man.
Right. Philip, I cannot understand how one political party has been let off the hook with all of this with the migrant hotels. We all know that Labour are doing it for God knows what their reasons are. And the Conservatives really haven't done anything. Reform are doing something. What's happened to the Social Democrats, the Lib Democrats? Not a dicky bird out of their mouth. Now, they took over seats from the Conservatives. You can be sure that a lot of those Conservative voters are not happy with what's going on in their councils and areas either, but not a word out of them. Has Ed Davey sort of left the country?
Ian, I think you bring up a very valid point. I can't think of anything that Ed Davey has said about it. And again, a number of the other political parties that are around there. And you're right to say that the Conservatives actually started this by putting a lot of the asylum seekers into hotels, and Labour have inherited it, but seem to be making it worse. But I think it's probably so much of a political hot potato that no politician, as we saw with Dan Jarvis earlier today, avoiding any questions, wants really to talk about it. What would your solution be?
Quite simply, we know what the solution is. They've got to get them out and back over the river, over the sea, out of the country. You can't do anything else. It's just getting a joke. It's whatever you talk about in the street, you talk about hospitals, you talk about schools, everything, security for individuals. I could say something which is in my mind constantly, and I'll say it to you because I know your feelings on it. Israel got illegal immigrants went over in October the 7th, raped, murdered, kidnapped, right? But they've gone after to try and protect their own public. Yeah? Here, they've got illegals coming in who have murdered, who have stolen, and do other things which are numerous, and yet the government here do absolutely nothing to protect the inhabitants of the country.
So do you think we're putting too much emphasis on trying to protect those that say they're escaping from oppression in their home countries, and not enough to protect the people in our own country?
Yeah, because it's shown, because even some of the immigrants that have come here legally are more interested in flying the flags of their original countries than flying the flags of the country they've come to for supposedly a better life.
Yeah, Ian, no, you make very, very valid points. Thank you very much indeed for calling in. We've got another caller coming in, and that's Dave from London. And Dave, I think you want to talk about Rachel Reeves's tax.
Yeah, hi Philip. Congratulations on the role. You're doing all right. Keep going. I just don't understand. Well, I do understand, I suppose, but I don't get why they have to stick to these rigid rules. So, for example, she could increase income tax to 21%, but at the same time increase the tax-free allowance from 12.5 to maybe 15,000 or 18,000 or whatever that number is. And at that point, their so-called working people that are on lower incomes, they wouldn't be hit by the 1% income tax increase, because it would be offset a bit by the increase in the personal allowance. But obviously, people earning above that would then be hit a bit more. So I just don't understand why everyone has to stick to their guns at all costs. No sensible business would do this. If a business was facing this problem, they would put every option on the table. But all our government seems to be able to do is go away and think about how to tax people that that don't vote Labour. I.e., if you've got a house worth more than 500 grand, you probably don't vote Labour. So let's hit them. But I can tell you now, it'll kill the property market, and she'll be coming back with another black hole in some time soon.
So, Dave, as a Londoner, are you concerned about what it's being attributed to her? We haven't actually heard anything out of Rachel Reeves ourselves. There's a lot of reporting going around, and that would suggest that we've had the typical leak from within Number 11 or somewhere in government saying these are what the proposals are, so that they can test the water out in the community as to how they're going to fly. What are your thoughts on her rises in property tax? Are you concerned as a Londoner?
Yeah, what they don't seem to realise is most Londoners may have a 600 or 700 grand property, but they've probably got a 400 grand mortgage on it. So to think, somebody in Darlington's got a 300 grand house, they probably haven't got a mortgage on it the size of someone in London has. So it's not actually, oh, look at me, I've got an expensive property. The bank owns most of the properties in London because most people haven't paid off their mortgages, and the people they're really going to hammer will be pensioners and people approaching retirement who don't have income and are now going to get hit with what, an annual tax? I mean, it's bonkers.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. We've got another caller coming in. I think we can squeeze in before the next break. And that's Jessica. And Jessica, you want to talk about illegal immigrants. Jessica, where in the country are you?
I'm in Northamptonshire. So I know there's a couple of hotels around here as well. And I understand, and we've got Reform as our council leaders, which is great. My concern is, you had someone on the show and they're like, yeah, just dump them in the field in tents. And I'm kind of like, I feel like the farmers are getting enough stick. And obviously with all these new taxes coming in as well, they're probably going to get a bit more. And I don't feel that that's a very safe thing. You have children who live in villages. You don't have policing around villages. I don't think they should go in the communities and kick people out of their houses either. I mean, it's just this is going to cause, I'm guessing that's why not many politicians have talked about it, because they're now probably scurrying around trying to think of something, but I really don't think dumping them in a field. I mean, just look at after festivals and things, like the tents and stuff and the mess and the litter. And, we have a lot of elderly who live in the villages. They bought the houses when they were very, very, very cheap. I know they're not now, but, and have lived there all their life, and there's no police. And so, yeah, it's just worrying about what's going to happen now, because this is obviously going to start snowballing. Councils have seen a way, and rightly so, they shouldn't be in hotels. Do you know what I mean? They shouldn't even be here. To be honest.
Well, so Jessica, come on. I'm going to put you in the spot. Just pretend I've got Angela Rayner, the Housing Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, sitting beside me in the studio. What would you be saying to her as to what they should be doing?
We have islands that are not used, that are off of England. You can build bases there. The army can erect. If we ever went to war, they could erect something very, very quickly that is safe, that is not a container, but a controlled, not confined, I don't want to say prison because that's horrible, but, you can use the
word camp. Too many people try and then say that this is a concentration camp. But those are people who, it's a camp. I've lived in military camps. That doesn't mean it's a concentration camp.
And they can be erected very quickly. They're very secure. There is islands that are offshore. I understand there's maybe some agricultural architectural ruin of a castle on it, but that would be better. Or we have massive ships, container ships, that are the size of small towns. Why can't we set up something on there so they're not even setting foot on shore?
Yeah, we could buy an old cruise ship. Yes, Jessica, I think I'm violently agreeing with a lot of your sentiments. But again, you're talking common sense. So thank you for calling in. Now, I want to get a couple of your texts, new ones that have just been brought in. A text from Dan in Huddersfield. Just a thought on flags. Why is it okay for Keir to have a union flag behind him when he's doing one of his benign pieces to camera, but it's not okay for people to fly them? Yeah, fair point. When I'm doing my broadcast from home, I've got a union flag and an Irish tricolour behind me. That causes real confusion for some people. A text from Ellis in Shropshire. These councils that are moving the flags need to be very careful. They're going up not to cause angst, but to regain our identity. But these councils will anger people so much. I can see that people will withhold payments. They need to remember who holds ultimate power and who pays their wages. And they will be kicked out of the next voting. It will be all their own fault. And a final text from Tad in Cambridge. The late and much lamented Lord Norman Tebbit used to propose a cricket test to establish an immigrant's true loyalty. An international test match gives us a really good indication. Well, Tad, I'm not a cricket fan, so I think I would fail that hands down, or I was trying to think of a cricketing analogy that I could use, but I can't. You have me stumped. There we go. I finally got a cricketing analogy in. So we're off for another quick break, and then we're going to be talking about the use of facial recognition software at the Notting Hill Carnival, which takes place this weekend. Thank you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, welcome back. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Ian Collins this afternoon. And you've got half an hour of my dulcet tones to go. But it's not just me. We've got some fantastic guests. And this next one, I'm really looking forward to. Getting into the story, the Met Police Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, has hit back at critics of live facial recognition at Notting Hill Carnival, slamming claims of mass surveillance. Rowley insists that the tech will target dangerous offenders, not communities, to ensure the safety of over 1 million attendees. And let's get a word from this on former Bedfordshire Police and Crime Commissioner Festus Akinbusoye. Festus, welcome to the show. Did I get your name right?
You were absolutely perfect. Let's leave it like that, shall we?
Thank you very much indeed. You do know how difficult it is sometimes pronouncing things when you've got an Ulster accent and you think of things with an Ulster brain and Ulster pronunciations.
I can understand what you're saying perfectly, so you're fine.
But welcome to the show. The Met defending use of live facial recognition software at Notting Hill Carnival. Is it not just mass surveillance?
No, it's not. Look, we already have one of the highest proportion of CCTV cameras per probably even square mile in the world, okay? And people often talk about the fact that, we've got all this digital evidence, but the police don't come to recover this, they can't go through them. And the police will say to you, well, we can't go through them because they're just hours and hours and hours of video footage, and we're looking for one person. Well, guess what? We now have a piece of technology that has moved on miles over the last decade when it first started. And it can allow the police to be able to identify certain things without the use of a human being having to constantly go through hundreds of people. Why should that be a problem? The priority of the police, without fail and without question, must be public safety. Mm-hmm. And so I support the use of these cameras. If anything, if it stops troublemakers or those who are wanted for sexual offences from coming to the carnival, so be it. It will make it a lot more fun for everybody else.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The facial recognition software will alert to certain faces, and they say this could be such and such. But there always has to be a human in the link, a human in the loop, to make the decision as to whether that face that's been flashed up is actually a suspect, and then someone has to make a decision as to whether to go and question them, arrest them, or do something else. So this isn't a computer saying there's someone guilty and automatically sending something from a computer out to arrest them and charge them.
You know, the weird thing about this is that you would have thought, with the way some of the people are going on about this, is that this camera actually goes out and arrests people by itself. You know, it's still a human being that has to intervene and make an informed decision. This is just an aid. Okay, and look, the Met have already been able to make over 500 arrests, okay, using this live facial recognition cameras. Other police forces in the country have been able to do the same. You've got prolific sex offenders who have been arrested. You've had people who have been wanted by the courts who have been arrested by this. If you have a high street of thousands of people, say Oxford Street, for example, all right, 2 or 3, even 10 police officers on the Oxford Street will not be able to detect me if I was a wanted person, if I had a balaclava, if I had my face covered. These cameras can actually detect me from a crowd more than a police officer would be able to do. Why should this be a problem? This is just a way of enabling the police to do their job in keeping us safe, which is something that everybody, including Londoners, will definitely want.
But you know, two criticisms that really come out a lot of the time is that they tend to flag up people from racial minority backgrounds more often than they'll flag up people from a non-minority background. And there's also complaints that whenever these are used around sites of religious sites, especially religious sites that represent minority backgrounds, mosques, etc., that it's impinging on their privacy rights. What have you got to say on that?
Well, it is true that historically these live facial recognition cameras were very poor at deciphering between people of darker skins. Okay. However, the technology has moved on so far in the last 3-4 years to the point where that error rate is negligible. So what they're talking about there is the false positive rate. Okay. Some of these now have a false positive rate of about 1%.
And then you've got a human being that makes a decision.
And the reality is this: there is no police tactic that is 100% accurate. In the same way that there is no medical procedure that is 100% foolproof. There is a risk involved in any kind of technology-involved intervention. The issue is, do the benefits outweigh the downsides? Now, my only caveat to this, Philip, is that whenever the police are using this technique, this tactic, they have to make it public. They have to let the public know why they're doing what they're doing, and they should make the data available to the public. So even if you make a mistake, let us know where you're getting wrong and what you're doing to fix it in the future, rather than just telling us about the positive side of it, because there will be mistakes made, and that will give an opportunity to learn for the future. But without question, we need to have this in place. We need the police to have all the tools that they need to do their job, and public safety must be the priority. End of story.
Now, I'm going to declare an interest here because I've written quite a lot about facial recognition software and capabilities. So I know quite a bit about the technology and everything else. And from my perspective, all it does is it provides an electronic equivalent of putting hundreds more police officers out around crowds, but in a way where you haven't got hundreds of police officers in uniform potentially disturbing others. You're having a good time and trying to have a good time. You're doing it quietly and covertly to allow the smaller number of police officers there, and therefore the London government is not paying the Metropolitan Police more money for the staff that's out there, and they can use the other police officers in different areas. Am I in the right ballpark?
You are. And I used to be a special constable, so a volunteer police officer. And that's why I became a police and crime commissioner. And I can tell you now that, look, you go around doing foot patrols, and yes, police officers do foot patrols, and I did that myself. And what I will tell you is this: when you start your shift, you're given a parade of faces. Let's say about 20, all right? You now have a 12-hour shift. How many of those faces will you be able to recognize by even the second hour, let alone the 10th hour of your shift? Because you've got so many other things that you have to go and deal with. Now, assuming one of those sexual predators on young children walk past you on a high street, they could even say hello to you. You would not recognize them. But that's because I'm a human being, as are all other police officers. But all this camera does is to give the police an extra piece of kit to be able to better do their job. And then they make an informed decision, compile the evidence, and then the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, makes a charge decision. That is it. Why anyone would have an issue with this, I honestly don't know.
I think part of the issue comes in as to people thinking that their data is automatically going to be stored in some form of police database and then used for other things. Can you give assurances? You've been Police and Crime Commissioner. You'll have had a look at this and how the data has been handled, and make sure that there's no political ramifications of what's happening. Can you give people the assurance that this data isn't being stored and used in a way that could target them in some other way in the future?
From what I know about this system does not have a database of every person's face in the country. There is no database that can hold that much information.
Yeah.
What it will have, however, is the faces of individuals who are being sought for by the authorities, which is not the entire population of everyone going to Notting Hill Carnival. The likelihood of your face and my face being on there is almost zero, unless either of us are wanted by the police. Okay? What it does is that it will match the faces that go past it with the faces on the database, which are the faces of those who are wanted. All right? Now, if your face does not match what is already on the database, within a twinkling of an eye, it is deleted. It does not store people's faces. What it does is that it matches faces that it sees with those that's already on the database, and if it doesn't match, it's deleted.
Now, the technology, I understand, again, if the Metropolitan Police pioneered a new technique of looking for people called super recognizers. For those that don't know who super recognizers are, they're individuals who, for some reason or other, have got the ability to identify people from seeing a very, very small proportion of their body, their face. It could be an eye, it could be an ear, it could be a nose, it could be the way they walk. Do you think, will this technology, if you combine it with super recognizers, allow the police to see through effectively people wearing balaclavas or trying to disguise their identity in a way, and therefore help catch those criminals who are trying to work through the crowds but disguise themselves?
Even these so-called super recognizers, Philip, are not as good as what these LFRs, live facial recognition cameras, can do. We now have technology that can actually spot a dark person like me in a dark room. That is how good these are now.
And wearing a balaclava?
Yes, because they will use based on the distance between your eyes.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, while I've got you on, we've had the crime survey for England and Wales that's just come out recently. It shows that only 49% of people rated local police as good or excellent in 2025. Commenting on police visibility having dropped significantly, with only 11% of people seeing foot patrols weekly, never mind daily, down from 29% a decade ago. Victim satisfaction with police responses fell to 51% in 2025 compared to 70% in 2015 and 75% in 2014. Do you think that we're seeing a decline in policing?
I think what we're seeing is a massive increase in demand relative to the level of policing. The population of this country has grown massively since, say, even 2010. We all know this. The level of funding has not kept pace. Unfortunately, we had the austerity years where there were cuts to police numbers. I'm glad that this started to increase between 2015 right up to last year. But unfortunately, what your listeners need to know is that this number is now going down. Again, since Labour came into government last year, the funding situation is a problem. And what is even more tragic, that is hardly spoken about, and I think it will come to the fore in the next 12 months, is the level of police officers who are leaving the job. this is a disaster that is waiting to happen. So at the time, we've got demand going up, retention is flatlining or even, recruitment is flatlining or dropping, but retention is just falling through the floor right now. So even officers don't want to be police officers anymore because they can't really do what they signed up to do. And I think one of the ways that we're going to fix this is to have politicians, either mayors or police and crime commissioners and home secretaries, who are going to be full square behind the police, improve the morale of police officers, and let them get on with doing their job. Mm-hmm. That is very, very important because the level of attrition in policing is really, really bad at the moment, and we have to find a way to reverse this quickly.
Well, Festus, on that point, I couldn't agree with you more. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and getting your understanding of facial recognition software. Now, for all of you out there, we're giving you a chance to win £5,000 spending money plus tickets to watch American football when it returns to Wembley this October. The Los Angeles Rams take on the Jacksonville Jaguars in the autumn, and we're giving you the chance to win 6 seats in a private box with full hospitality, plus £5,000. If you want to be in with a chance to win, well, here's how to enter.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word Wembley to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or enter for free by calling 0330 880 3338. All entries must be received by 25th August at 11 p.m. This is a TalkSport limited promotion run on TalkSport, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. See TalkSport.com for terms and conditions.
This is a kind of retribution through the back door, rather like devolution was, to try and break Britain up into regions, or break England up into regions, if you like, and effectively promote the Scottish flag, promote the Welsh flag, and denigrate the St George's Cross, which is why I'm so keen that we do start to fly the St George's Cross. I'm going to buy a flagpole and start flying one from the end of my drive. I think it's time.
Good man.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So, folks, welcome back. I can't believe we're going to get 10 minutes to go, but we've got time to take one more call and get to some of your texts. I think we've got Janet on the line from North Wales. And Janet, you want to talk about illegal immigrants. What have you got to say?
Hello, Philip. I mainly called up to tell you what a fantastic job you're doing.
Thank you very much indeed. Fivers in the post. I've run out of how many fivers I have to send off today.
Yeah, well, it's going to take more than that, Philip. But anyway.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, now, I'm calling up about the migrants. Now, look, all my life I've been told I'm too soft, my dad, and I'm 63 now, so this is many years ago. Jan, you're a mug. You let people take advantage of you. My sister, Jan, you can't help everyone. I've always been soft. Used to be a long-term Labour voter. I'm getting really, really angry with this idea that anybody that has a problem with migration is somehow far right and really horrible. And it really frustrates me. Something has to be done, Philip, and I really, really think we have to look at setting up camps. Ultimately, I think they all need to be, well, most of them probably need to be deported, but they have to be in camps. We can't home them. People here have got enough problems. There isn't enough housing, so they need to be put into some sort of camp. Don't want them being suffered. I don't want them to suffer at all. But that's the way we've got to go.
Oh, I lived in military camps for many, many years, and well, some of the accommodation was stuff that the asylum seekers seem to have refused. But you say you were a one-time Labour voter. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But are you considering voting for anyone else next?
I'm going to vote Reform. Okay. Do I believe everything that they say? Am I absolutely sure of it? No, to be honest, I have been politically homeless, so I'm now at the point where I'm thinking anybody but, let's give someone else a chance, and that's where I am with it.
OK, Janet, well, thank you very much indeed for your call. We've got time for one more call, I think, to come in, and this is, if I'm correct, Sean. Sean, what have you got to say?
Hi, I'm a veteran. I live in Bournemouth. I'm lucky enough to have I live in a veterans housing. Down here, I think it's terrible what they've done to the town. It's a no-go area now in the evenings. When they had the Bibby bus stop in Portland.
The Bibby Stockholm, the accommodation ship.
I stayed on there when I was down at Falklands. So that's exactly the same.
And was it comfortable?
Sorry?
Was it comfortable?
Oh, it was fantastic. It's absolutely wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. I had swimming pools, a bar. It's fantastic. What can I say? They filled our hotels with these people. Well, there's no room for the tourists anymore. But there's places where they go. There's empty army units, places. The
army barracks, yes.
Army barracks, RAF barracks are not used anymore.
Yeah.
There's plenty of room for them there. I mean, then you can keep an eye on them, see what they're doing. They're all of them doing their Deliveroo's down here.
Yeah, well, Sean, I've heard Bournemouth is particularly bad, and
terrible.
Yes, you're a veteran like I, and we have lived in some interesting conditions is the best way to describe them. Some of the hotels that even people are describing as 2-star, 3-star hotels, and appalling for the asylum seekers we'd have found luxurious.
Yeah, the top hotels.
Yeah, exactly. Mind you, I'm going to caveat that. I'm going to be very rude here out to the RAF. A 2-star and a 3-star hotel is not something that you'd ever find anyone from the RAF in. Sean, you've made very valid points. Thank you very much indeed for your service. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Now, I just want to get to a couple of your texts before Jeremy Kyle comes in, as he's taking over for me in a few moments. Text from Richard from Kettering. Great show, Philip. As a former military man like yourself, I find it highly offensive that our brethren, the veterans who are living homeless on the streets, dealing with alcohol and drug addiction and issues to do with PTSD through their combat-related stress, are thrown in the scrap heap and forgotten while we give shelter and sustenance and money and smartphones to what I consider to be an invading army of young men exploiting our good nature. It's scandalous and immoral. Richard, yes, you're right, and I find it scandalous and immoral as well. We should look after those that have served our country first and foremost. Text from Kevin and Bolton. If flags are to be taken down for health and safety reasons, there's no reason to have been risk assessments. It would be interesting to see. There are reasons to have risk assessments. It'd be interesting to see what difference is between the Union and the Palestinian flag assessments. Kevin, yes, I doubt those risk assessments have ever been done because it's more paperwork. And text from Dan in Wiltshire. Good afternoon, Big Phil. Great to see you're having your own slot. In regard to housing immigrants, Dartmoor Prison has recently closed. It can't be beyond a witted man, except government perhaps to reopen it and use it for that. Dan, more common sense coming in. Well, we've got Jeremy Kyle has come in to take over from me. Big Phil, well, that's...
Where's the Big Phil? Who said you were big? Where's that come from?
Well, that's something that comes from Alex Phillips. She refers to me as Big Phil all the time when she gets me down the line, or whenever we're having a cider or two together.
Really?
Yes.
I can't. I don't drink, obviously.
Well, Jeremy, yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice having you on that side.
Well, well, there you go. Listen, fair play. Have you enjoyed it? You had a good one?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And what are you talking about?
I've absolutely no idea. And the best way to start this show is to say that, because at 30 seconds to 4 o'clock yesterday, that extraordinary decision for Epping Council took place. And the outpouring was unbelievable from our listeners. And what's really interesting for me is how many councils are going to follow suit, right?
Well, yes.
You've got...
I think it's going to be a tsunami of councils.
Not sure how many reform councils there are, 10, 13, 12, I don't know. They will follow suit. Well, the Conservatives also will be presumably a bit more proactive than they've been, because they can see that generates interest within the general public. What it did yesterday for me was absolutely blow apart, again, another part of what the Labour government is, because they made it very well known, didn't they? We want migrants out of hotel rooms.
Well, exactly.
So what are you going to do with them now? Because that, of course, is the concern for the community. Social housing, then you're going to throw tenants out because the Home Office are offering long contracts to private landlords. It's not going to go away. The way to sort this, quite simply, is to deport the people who shouldn't be in this country and make the United Kingdom less of a bleeding pool for people to come here. It's not difficult.
Well, but it's more common sense. That's why you work here. Do you think the government's ever going to do this?
Why don't any politicians have common sense?
Well, it isn't a criteria. Maybe we should be marking them on their CV. Well, maybe we should be marking if their CV's accurate before we actually let them become politicians.
Well, yes. Well, breaking Richard III, as we call Rachel from accounts. She's an economist. She says it all the time. Do you not believe she's an economist?
Well, she could well be an economist, but she's not a very good one if she doesn't understand the relationship between business and the economy.
I don't understand. We were just doing Plank of the Week. There's one thing I don't understand is, right, so all of us have a lot less money.
Yeah.
Because she's taxed us more.
Yes.
And she's still skinned.
Yes.
Which means she spent it wrongly.
Yeah.
And it's crap at her job.
And it means we've got less money to spend.
Yeah.
So there's less coming into the economy.
She does look like Richard III, though, doesn't she?
Well, she does.
If you do have a look at her, Richard III. Yeah, all of them. It frightens me. But yesterday, somehow, Philip made me feel that, like, the British public